Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Case 1. Every town has a dark side. A community will gather tonight to remember a mother killed 8 years ago in Midlothian, southwest of Dallas. This April will mark 8 years since the murder of Missy Beavers. The wife and mother of 3 was killed in a Midlothian church. Mother and fitness trainer Terry Missy Beavers was murdered inside a Midlothian church. So 8 years ago today, somebody wearing tactical gear murdered a mother inside an Ellis County church. Her killer has never been found. In the early morning hours of April 18th of 2016, a woman was brutally murdered inside a place that's supposed to be safe. A church. Missy Beavers, a mother, wife, and beloved fitness instructor, was attacked by somebody who left the murder weapon behind, was caught on camera, and whose car was potentially seen nearby the crime scene driving erratically. And yet, despite all this evidence, the killer has never been identified. As a result, almost 9 years later, this case remains unsolved. Let's head on down to Midlothian, Texas, and uncover the truth behind the murder of Missy Beavers. Missy was a woman who had always stood out in her community because of her kindness, warmth, and dedication to teaching fitness. Born and raised in the great state of Texas herself, she was an extroverted type of lady with an undeniably contagious energy. So for her, she was never going to get a job just sitting behind a desk pushing papers. She was going to be keeping things moving, as she always did. Her childhood was full of outdoorsy trips and lots of sports. Coming from a family that taught the values of hard work and commitment, Missy would go on to college, and after that, she met and married Brandon Beavers, and the pair had 3 daughters together, and life was good. Amidst her responsibilities as a mother, which she thoroughly enjoyed, Missy continued on with her passion for fitness and joined the Camp Gladiator program, which is a popular outdoor group fitness class in the Lone Star State. As an instructor, Missy's classes became a place where people found not only a physical challenge, but also a community of individuals eager to help one another in reaching their goals. I know Missy on so many levels, and her positive attitude, her great spirit, the scriptures and godly stuff that we shared as women together, there's no doubt in my mind that she was living her purpose. And this was where the passion was for her. Missy didn't just teach exercises, she inspired her students to push beyond their own limits, believe in themselves, and she liked to watch people change for the better and transform themselves into the best version they could possibly be. And really, her life can't be told in just a couple of paragraphs. The reach she had in touching so many lives, including her family's, was fond. But it's important to know because what happened to her is senselessly tragic, and her story deserves a proper ending. One where whoever is responsible gets what they deserve, and Missy's family can get a little bit of closure on the darkest chapter, no doubt, of their lives. On the morning of April 18th of 2016, as usual, 45-year-old Missy had planned a nice outdoor workout routine for her Camp Gladiator students in one of the areas she regularly used for those morning classes. However, that day, persistent rains had made the ground pretty muddy, and the threat of more storms forced a last-minute change of plans. This move was nothing crazy, it wasn't even unusual, as whenever the weather was bad, the class moved inside of the Creekside Church of Christ. But on this particular day, this small change would prove to be the starting point of this whole horrific tragedy. Missy arrived early to the church to set everything up before her students arrived. Very early, in fact, as surveillance cameras caught her in the parking lot a little after 4 a.m., so she could bring stuff in and have everything ready to roll for the 5 a.m. class. When a small group of them showed up, they entered through the large front doors, and the place was eerily still. That energy that Missy gave off had been snuffed out in a horrifying display. From there on the floor, she was dead, lying in a pool of blood with multiple puncture wounds all across her body. Around her some tools, a hammer, presumably the items used in the killing, and quickly someone tried to help her, but they soon realized it was too late. The scene was bewildering, terrifying, and completely out of place in that space, and in a town like Midlothian. When the police got to work, obviously they were looking at a homicide, but who did it and why? Was this a random act with Missy being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or was she perhaps targeted? Initially, the police felt like there was a good possibility that this was in fact a chance encounter, that the perpetrator was likely there to steal stuff from the church, thinking that in the early morning hours no one would be there. Then when they came upon Missy in that hallway, they were startled and just killed her before fleeing. The thing about that angle, though, is that nothing of value was missing. On top of that, Missy's own cell phone, iPad, and wallet were left right there in the open. Could someone have planned on robbing, freaked out when they saw Missy, killed her, and then forgot to rob stuff? It's possible, but that doesn't really sound likely. Luckily for the detectives, the church was equipped with a surveillance camera system, while the ones outside were not functioning at that time. And the same cameras that saw Missy moving her equipment into the church could be the same ones that caught the killer, which would make this an open and shut case. Only not so fast, because while the footage did provide some valuable insights, it simply wasn't enough to make any substantial progress. And here's why. There was surveillance video from that morning, now grimly familiar to many. A mysterious person in tactical gear with a... And going through the tapes, which were captured around 4:15 a.m., the video shows an unknown individual dressed head to toe in police tactical gear, something like a SWAT team member would wear, methodically wandering the church's hallways. And this suspect, clad in a black helmet, army camo pants, gloves, and a police-marked vest, can be seen smashing glass in various spots and attempting to open doors. And they have their hammer on them and other tools, and so the idea that this was a crime of opportunity didn't fit the mold. This person got ready and had definitely planned. The question was, though, was this a robbery they wanted to pull off, or was Missy actually the intended target? And while this unknown individual is making their way through the halls, Missy, meanwhile, is grabbing her gear out of the truck, unaware that she was about to come face to face with her killer. At 4:18 a.m., that's the last time anyone sees her on camera, walking back inside. Despite extensive analysis from lots of experts in the field who scrutinized the tapes, the suspect's identity still remains a total mystery. And so much so, in fact, that they don't even officially know if this person is male or female. The individual's distinct walking gait, which appears somewhat feminine and impaired, has been pored over, including by forensic podiatrist Dr. Michael Nierenberg. And police wondered if this person were injured or had something wrong with one of their legs. However, it was Dr. Nierenberg who concluded that the strange walking was likely caused by the heavy gear that they were not used to wearing. And the perpetrator actually stumbles a few times because of this, leaning into the walls in order to prop themselves up. And still, despite the uneven feet, the killer's behavior appeared meticulous and calculated. They did not seem rushed at all, which suggested it wasn't an impulsive crime, but rather a deliberate act. Someone who knew what Missy was doing, and that nobody else was going to show up there for at least another 30 or 40 minutes. Now this fueled theories that it was a personal attack rather than a robbery. The choice of tactical clothing and the use of the hammer as a weapon made it clear that the killer was prepared for what they were about to do. On top of that, the force with which the hammer had been used indicated a clear intent to cause harm. So ultimately, it was determined that the killer was breaking glass and smashing locks to make it look as though it were a robbery gone wrong. However, the sole intention of this whole thing was to murder Missy. But who and why would anybody want to do this? Initial evidence at the scene, such as fingerprints and traces of DNA, didn't provide conclusive leads for investigators. They even tried to trace the killer's escape routes based on the footage and evidence at the crime scene, but that got them nowhere either. It was time to talk to those who knew her best, to see if they could shed any light on who could have possibly been responsible. Interviews with her family and friends confirmed that Missy had no known enemies to speak of. Even though her family life was good by all accounts, they had to look into her husband Brandon, of course, to see if maybe things weren't as rosy as they appeared to everybody else. As it turns out, Brandon was far away at the time of the murder, all the way in Mississippi on a fishing trip. However, a few days after the killing, Brandon's father, Randy, would go on to bring a shirt with blood on it to the dry cleaners. Suspicions were piqued from that, though it didn't last too long. For one, Randy himself was out in California when the killing happened. As for the blood, that came from a dog after he broke up a fight between two of the animals. DNA testing confirmed the stain did belong to a canine and not a human. The Midlothian community didn't remain idle in all this. After all, there was a killer in their midst, so they wanted answers just as much as the police and Missy's family did. Despite the lack of progress in the investigation, the residents came together to support the family and seek justice. Vigils and acts of solidarity were organized, where tributes were paid to the victim and support was shown to her 3 daughters who lost their mother in such a brutal manner. Social media then became a key tool for spreading awareness about the case, with many people sharing information and urging anyone with potential leads to please come forward. In looking through Missy's own social media footprint, detectives did find something worth looking into further. These were messages coming in across LinkedIn from an unknown male in the months leading up to her death. The contents of what exactly those messages said have never been revealed, but they were described as being creepy and strange, according to the police. This angle was followed up on, but clearly it was just another dead end. Even though they don't believe this person who wrote those messages killed Missy, the authorities still believe that Missy spoke with her killer in some form or another before she was killed, and they're adamant that she knew the perpetrator, even if they weren't well acquainted or even friends. But possibly this killer had an obsession or fixation, at the very least, and acted out in a violent manner when they realized they couldn't be a part of her life. Lothian police released 2 new details in the fitness trainer murder investigation. Police are looking for this car, seen on the morning Missy Beavers was murdered near the church where the crime was committed. And one final peculiar piece of evidence emerged from a nearby SWFA outdoor store in the early morning hours of that fateful day. The surveillance footage from there showed a 2010 to 2012 Nissan Altima behaving suspiciously in the parking lot at just around 2 a.m. The car circled the lot, flashed its headlights, and parked in a secluded spot before leaving. Under normal circumstances, who would care about this? But given what transpired just a few hours later, it's pretty odd behavior worth looking into. Except once again, police reached a dead end on that front. Despite public appeals, the driver of that vehicle has never come forward, leaving its connection to the case uncertain. And so it's now been close to 9 years since Missy was murdered in cold blood in that church in Texas. The reality is that the investigation has made little significant progress. It's hard to believe given all the amount of footage available, but that's where this case remains at the moment, cold and unsolved. While authorities continue to actively pursue the case, the lack of tangible evidence remains the biggest obstacle. The FBI and other agencies have jumped in offering their help, but so far they've not been able to identify the suspect either. In their efforts to solve the crime, authorities have repeatedly emphasized the importance of receiving any information that could lead to the capture of the perpetrator, offering a substantial reward of $150,000 for tips that could help resolve the case. So, if you have any information whatsoever, please reach out to them. What is perhaps most perplexing about this whole crime is the possibility that maybe the perpetrator had no prior connection to Missy in any way as the police believe. They don't know that for sure, and if this hypothesis proves true, it would help explain why they can't find any evidence linking Missy to this person. And maybe this was just a deranged individual who entered the church with the intention of committing a robbery, or even just vandalism. When Missy showed up in front of them, the fatal confrontation occurred. Police were forced to investigate all individuals who had contact with Missy prior to her death. This included reviewing her cell phones, emails, and social relationships to determine if there was any conflict or reason that could have motivated the attack. However, when all close circles of Missy, including friends, family, and colleagues, were ruled out as potential suspects, will this further help raise the theory that maybe they were looking at the wrong angle and that this was in fact random? Brandon, Missy's husband, has spoken publicly where he has discussed the events leading up to Missy's murder, the anguish he felt when he received the news of her death while out of town, and the difficult experience of being considered a suspect at the start of the investigation. Although he has faced intense scrutiny from both the media and authorities, his primary goal has always been to provide any useful information that could help resolve the case. But there was so much stuff going on around the house, a lot of people. The Beavers family has maintained their dignity, although clearly affected by the tragedy. Brandon shared with the public how the family has had to endure rumors and speculations about their possible involvement in the murder, facing constant pressure while trying to maintain normalcy for their children. Despite the difficulties, Brandon and his family have relied on their faith. You've got to believe in something greater than yourself or greater than the pain, and it has to be the God Almighty. A recurring theme in all of his statements has been Brandon's belief that the murder was a random act, which contrasts with what the authorities think, who still suggest it likely was a premeditated crime that was targeted specifically at Missy. Case 2. It begins on a Friday, April 18, 2008, and most people are returning home from work, as is this woman Rurika, who lives in a newly built apartment in Kodawar, Tokyo. Now even for Japan, this apartment is especially secure. It has security features, surveillance such as cameras when you enter the building, cameras at the elevator of every floor, and it's just a 10-minute walk from Xiaomi Station on the JR-KO line, making it a convenient place to stay. Now this woman was seen entering her apartment complex, as she usually did by herself after work. She headed up to the very top floor, the 9th floor, where she had a studio apartment that she shared with her sister, room 916. There are cameras on the 9th floor, but they're just at the elevator. That evening, at 8:43 p.m., her sister, Rika, also returned to the apartment, fully expecting to find her younger sister at home. Because just an hour earlier, at 7:21 p.m., Rika had messaged her saying that she was off work and she was heading home. Rika had fully expected her sister already to be home when she arrived. When she reached for the door, though, she was surprised it was unlocked. And holding the handle and pushing it inside, she found the apartment pitch black, which was extremely strange. The only light was coming from outside, but she did notice her sister's shoes just inside the door. At the time she thought, okay, my sister had an emergency and had to rush to the bathroom. She left the door unlocked and the lights off because she forgot to turn them on before heading in. Unfortunately, Rika was never seen again, as if she just vanished into thin air. This case obsessed many across Japan, because nothing seemed to be able to explain this woman's disappearance. And this sudden disappearance led many to invoke the term kamikakushi, which is a concept from Japanese folklore, referring to people being spirited away by the gods or demons. And when this crime was finally solved, many proclaimed that this was almost the perfect crime. Initially, Rika decided to unwind. She changed into her pajamas, grabbed a yogurt, and sat down to watch some TV. But as the time passed, she realized their little studio apartment was eerily quiet. So she gets up and walks up to the bathroom door to knock to see if her sister needs anything. To her shock, the door just opens. There's no one inside. But then she realizes her sister probably just stepped out to take a phone call. This was quite common between the sisters because they shared a studio apartment. It would be disruptive if they both spoke loudly at such a small apartment. She goes to grab her coat and takes a walk outside to try and find her sister. So first she heads down to the first floor, doesn't see anything. Now she starts to get worried because it's been over an hour and her sister hasn't said a word. Rika returns to the 9th floor, wondering if perhaps her sister made it back while she was out looking for her. But this time, she notices something that completely unsettles her. There's little bloodstains on the wall near the entrance. Something she didn't notice before. And now she completely freaks out. At 9:16, she places a call to the police and tells them that her sister's purse and cell phone are not in the apartment. The operator asks her a few questions and then advises her to stay inside and lock the doors. The officers are on their way. Rika then calls her parents at 9:25 p.m., informs her dad exactly what happened. While waiting for them to arrive, Rika looks through the apartment for any clues to help locate her sister. She finds that a knife has been missing, as well as a pink jersey that her sister used to wear. Looking closer now, she also finds her little sister's earrings on the floor, just at the door. And worryingly, more bloodstains were found on the tiles near the hallway. But these stains appeared to be smudged, as if a low-effort cleanup job was done. Police arrived in just over 10 minutes, and they started speaking to Rika about what happened. They also spoke to her parents when they arrived soon after. The bloodstains and signs of a struggle were limited just within the apartment. Looking through the building's camera feeds only raised more questions than it answered. Rika entered the building alone. She doesn't appear to be followed, and at 7:31 p.m., she exits the 9th floor elevator. Nothing seems to be out of the ordinary. There are only individuals who entered and exited the building that day. The police seal off all entrances and exits to the building. Now this apartment complex is brand new. It just opened a few months ago in December last year. The majority of its units are still vacant. The police decide to check even the vacant units. On the 9th floor, there's only one other unit that is occupied. 2 doors down at unit 918. Around 10:20 p.m. that night, officers knock on the door. But there is no answer. The officers wait a while before walking away. But then 20 minutes later, a man walks out. It's a 33-year-old resident of the unit, Takanori Hashijima. The officers asked him if he'd heard any strange noises or witnessed anything out of the ordinary. But Hashijima said he hadn't. When asked if he knew about his neighbor, he responded that he'd only moved in a month ago, and while he'd seen them, he didn't know their names. When they explained the full situation to him, he seemed genuinely taken aback and said, "I'm scared, this is terrifying." A day passes, the family is worried sick, and the police have already swept through all the vacant apartments in the complex. As there's only one other occupied apartment on the 9th floor, the police decide to pay Hashijima another visit. When they knock on Hashijima's door, he answers. They ask if they could enter and search through his apartment. He obliges, inviting them in. Once they enter, they notice a large stack of cardboard boxes all over his house. They ask if they can take a look. Hashijima more than cooperates. He even opens one of these boxes, revealing the contents, DVDs, animes, and video games. Hashijima even opens several other boxes for the police. Seeing his cooperation, the police don't stay long, and after searching his apartment for 20 minutes, they apologize for bothering him, thank him for his cooperation, and leave. Meanwhile, forensics came back, and they positively identified the blood in apartment 916 as belonging to Rurika. But there was also a partial fingerprint that they found, and that fingerprint did not belong to Rurika or her sister or their family members or anyone else who had access to that apartment. So the police decided to fingerprint every single resident that lived in the apartment complex. But all the fingerprints gathered were not a match for the one found in Rurika's apartment. Even more reporters and media had set up outside of the apartment complex, with their cameras pointing towards the building for any clues they could get, and they were trying to speak to anyone that was allowed access to come in and out of the building. Residents were being chased down for questions, and one of them was Hashijima. He seemed friendly and open to talk about what was happening upstairs, but the way he spoke to reporters was very strange. He talked about how horrifying the ordeal was, but then he would spontaneously start laughing. It's like his body language was the opposite of his words, and unlike many other residents, he seemed to be enjoying the attention. Hashijima laughed frequently during his interview. He laughed 16 times, often at the most inappropriate moments. He laughed when directly asked about Rurika, and even chuckled when questioned whether he found her attractive. When asked if he thought he was under suspicion, he laughed and said, "Well, yeah, I guess I am suspicious," before laughing again. Something just wasn't right about him, and the police decided to examine him again, starting with the fingerprints that he gave. They learned that the grooves and lines on his fingers were barely legible, as if he had tampered with them to make them unreadable. This significantly raised their suspicions of him, but it was still not enough evidence to arrest him. It wasn't until a month later, when the police surprised him by demanding his fingerprints again. He agreed reluctantly, and behold, these prints were a match for the partial fingerprint found in Rurika's apartment. Hashijima was arrested the next day, on May 25th. He could only be charged with breaking and entering, but this now gave him the authority for a thorough search of Hashijima's apartment, and they thoroughly ran through this with luminol and discovered large traces of blood, and the blood was a match for Rurika's DNA. And her DNA was pretty much found all over Hashijima's apartment, including the hallway, the bathroom, on a t-shirt, and it was horrifying to also find her DNA on a cutting board, on kitchen knives, and a knife sharpener. Hashijima's fridge also contained these brownish substances, which were believed to be blood and bodily fluids. They too matched with Rurika's DNA. On May 26th, the day after his arrest, Rurika's cell phone was discovered hidden behind the toilet in Hashijima's workplace. His fingerprints were found on the phone, which also contained a small photo of Rurika and a piece of paper with her name. Detectives confronted Hashijima with this mountain of evidence. It didn't take long before he confessed, but when he did, he was not shy or held back any details of what happened. He appeared to be reliving and enjoying the horrifying and sickening crime that he committed. Since moving in, he admits to being completely infatuated by a single young office lady who lived next door to him in room 916. In fact, he said he followed her for almost a month. But it's strange that he wasn't aware that she lived with her older sister. In fact, he seemed to be targeting the older sister Rurika. It just happened to be that the younger sister came home first. He admitted to having a deviant fantasy of wanting to create, in his own words, a slave for my selfish desires. And he chose April 18th, a Friday, as the date to carry out his plan because he would have the entire weekend to focus on his slave. When Rurika arrived home that evening, Hashijima, who had been listening for her, put on a tracksuit and walked barefoot to avoid noise and shoe prints. As soon as she opened the door, he pushed his way inside and ambushed her. In his own words, Rurika was screaming and fought back. He was surprised at her strength and how she nearly forced him out. But then he managed to slam her head against the wall, causing her to get dazed, and she even started to bleed. Her resistance faded, and he was able to tie her hands with a towel. He then took a knife from her studio apartment and threatened to kill her if she made a sound. With a knife to her throat, he led her into his apartment and threw her onto a mattress. He then used tape to restrain her. He turned off her cell phone and then attempted to sexually assault her. But once again, he was surprised how fiercely she was able to fight back, and he was unable to carry out his plan. Frustrated, he watched pornographic videos instead, and then he got so engrossed in his videos that he lost track of time, until he heard a knock at 10:20 p.m. He rushes to the door and looks through the peephole. When he sees 2 police officers, he panics even more. He hurries and secures Rurika's mouth with a gag and tape. In his own words, he hides inside for the next 20 minutes, but then decides to go out pretending to visit a convenience store as an excuse to observe the police's actions. But when he was stopped outside by officers, this completely freaked him out. Despite putting up an act of acting surprised and calm, internally, he was completely scared. And that's when he decided to abandon his plan to keep Rurika as his sex slave. Instead, he thought of ways of covering up his crime entirely. When Hashijima returned to his apartment, he used a stolen knife to stab Rurika in the neck. In his own words, he watched and waited for her to die, and he repeatedly thought, "Please die soon." She was taking longer to die than he expected, so he went ahead and removed the knife, believing it would speed up her death. And he kept checking her pulse and heartbeat as it slowly faded. He described her moans and groans to the police, the noises she was making as she took her final breath. This would disturb many in the trial that would take place, especially Rurika's family, who couldn't sit through this entire account and were crying. What saddened me through this entire thing is when the police knocked on the door, Rurika was just a few feet away, alive and able to be rescued from the grim fate that awaited her. They were so close, yet so far. After Hashijima confirmed that she no longer had a pulse and heartbeat, he untied her and dragged her body to the bathroom. He then stripped her naked and used knives and a saw to dismember her. He had these tools beforehand. He first cut off her head because, in his own words, he was too afraid to look at her face, feeling as though she was cursing him for what he had done. He then went through and cut off her limbs, one by one, even describing the color of flesh and fat. He then skinned her arms and legs before proceeding to work on her chest, where he cut her down to her stomach and removed her organs. From her head, he cut off her hair, the scalp, her eyes, her nose, her ears and lips, and placed them on the cutting board. Her bones were sawed into even smaller pieces, and many of her parts were boiled until they were soft, and then they were broken apart again into smaller pieces. Over the next several days, he said, he started flushing these pieces down the toilet. Some of the bones continued to be a problem, so he stored them in the refrigerator and hid others in dusty old boxes under his bed or at the bottom of larger piles. Yes, those same cardboard piles. He explained that by cooperating with the police, they would gain his trust and wouldn't push him to check the bottom of the piles, which had some of her bones and body parts. He then describes how he cut open the top of her skull and flushed her brains down the toilet. He describes how at one instance he was in the middle of dismemberment and police knocked on the door asking for fingerprints. He provided this to them as he had recently damaged his fingertips using a corrosive agent in his apartment. While slowly flushing Rurika's dismembered remains down the toilet was his primary method, some of her bones and body parts were kept in his backpack and pockets, and he would dispose of them during his walks to work, on dumpsters, sewers, or even where stray dogs were seen along the way. Hashijima kept Rurika's phone and planned to turn it off later to create the illusion that she was alive. This explains why it was found in his office later. The rest of her belongings, like her clothing, her wallet, and cards, were all cut into small pieces and flushed down the toilet. Hashijima admitted to disposing the last of her, a bone fragment, on May 1st, and when he noticed the decreasing police presence on May 8th, he disposed of the bloody towels in trash bins. He then resumed his life as normal until, of course, he was arrested. Based on his confession, the police launched a massive search of Kota Ward's sewer system, pipes, landfills, and garbage bins. They literally searched through mountains of feces and human waste in what is no doubt a shitty job. Between May 28th and June 6th, police recovered 49 bone fragments and 172 pieces of flesh, all cut into approximately 5 centimeters pieces, and all linked to Rurika through DNA testing. They also found her driver's license, pieces of flesh with a belly button piercing hole and a finger, all again matching her through DNA. Hashijima's murder trial began on January 13, 2009 at the Tokyo District Court. Prosecution began by showing photographs of Rurika Tojo's remains, which horrified the public and her family. Everyone wanted to understand who could do such a thing. Takanori Hashijima was born on January 5, 1975 in Okayama Prefecture into a prominent and affluent family. He was the eldest of 4 children, and his great father was a politician, and his father a successful tax accountant. But early in his life, he had a devastating accident. A month before his 2nd birthday, he fell into a tub of boiling water while chasing a cat and suffered severe burns on both legs. Multiple surgeries and skin grafts later, and being unable to walk for 6 months, he could finally slowly recover. While physically he was recovered, emotionally his scars ran deep, and he blamed these scars for the rest of his life because throughout his childhood, he endured endless bullying. Classmates would mock him, calling him a burnt kid and a fired dwarf. His father offered little emotional support, simply saying, "Men don't cry over something like that." He even forced him to wear shorts to school, which exposed his scars and exasperated the bullying. And Hashijima's mother didn't intervene. He claimed his entire life he was let down by everyone, including his parents, and grew to resent them deeply. He remained socially isolated, avoiding friendships and romantic relationships. In fact, he claims he's still a virgin. He blamed his parents for his accident and scars, believing that their negligence ruined his life. He even contemplated killing them at one point, but decided against it. In March 1993, after graduating, he moved to Tokyo to escape his past. He lived alone and earned a salary of 500,000 yen as a contract employee. His coworkers would describe him as a man who was deeply insecure about his position in the company. He was condescending to lower-level employees and hated anyone who was in a relationship, dismissing them as stupid. What really caught everyone's attention at the trial was his self-described fetish of the sexual attraction to amputated women. He describes how from a young age, he was drawn to explicit illustrations of women with amputated limbs in non-consensual scenarios. He would often masturbate to such material. Now knowing this, do you wonder what that bone saw was for? And also his account of what he did to Rurika? Is it the full truth, or is there a lot more to it before he dismembered her and flushed her down the toilet? We may never know, as it's impossible to do forensic examination on 5 centimeters pieces of a larger human body. Out of respect for the victim, we'll just stick to the facts presented in court. The prosecution sought the death penalty, as did Hashijima, who stated, "I want to be executed and apologize in hell." The defense, however, cited his traumatic upbringing, his mental state, his lack of criminal record, and his remorse shown throughout the trial, plus his detailed confession. But the prosecution countered that his remorse only surfaced after his arrest, and they pointed to his earlier behavior, such as laughing during interviews and working every day to dispose of the body and getting away with murder. They argued that his actions demonstrated a calculated, unrepentant mindset, and this justified the death penalty. On February 18, 2009, Takanori Hashijima was sentenced to life imprisonment. The ruling judge, Judge Hirade, stated that the motive for his crime stemmed from a twisted desire to turn Rurika Tojo into a sex slave. He harshly criticized Hashijima for killing and dismembering her out of fear of being caught. He described the disposal of her body as treating the victim as mere waste, and in his own words he said, "This is an extremely despicable crime that tramples on the dignity of the deceased and inflicts deep emotional pain on the family." But he would not give the death penalty because, referencing previous Supreme Court rulings, when there is only one victim, the crime must be exceptionally heinous to warrant the death penalty. And while the murder and the stabbing of Rurika in the neck was deemed cold-blooded, it was not persistent enough to be considered extremely cruel. The family was left disappointed by this ruling, and Hashijima himself expressed the desire to die as a form of apology. But Judge Hirade concluded, it is appropriate for him to spend the rest of his life praying for the victim's soul and atoning for his crimes. The prosecution appealed the decision the same month, and the first hearing was held at the Tokyo High Court on June 11. Hashijima did not appear, stating that he wanted to receive the death penalty. On September 10, 2009, the Tokyo High Court upheld the life sentence, closing the case. Hashijima remains in prison, likely for the rest of his life, serving his sentence in Chiba prison. A lot of research went into this case, including reading court documents. Case 3. A story of greed, bullying, gaslighting, and the ultimate betrayal. What began as a retreat amongst friends would soon unravel into a murder, and raise many unsettling questions about betrayal and the greed involved. This story is about a man, Jung Sang-yeep, who drowned under suspicious circumstances while vacationing with his wife, Lee Eun-hai, and their friends. Initially, the authorities at Gapyeong police station ruled his death an accident, but something about the official explanation didn't sit right with Sang-yeep's family. When the police initially closed the case claiming Sang-yeep's drowning was an accident, Sang-yeep's older sister, Yoon-mi-song, refused to accept these findings. She knew her brother. He was incredibly scared of water. Why would he go cliff jumping? Through a mutual connection, she reached out to a detective in the Ilsan-su-bu police station. Her suspicions? That Eun-hae was involved in his death, and that insurance fraud was at the heart of it all. Even though the case had been closed, the detective agreed to take another look. By early November 2019, Ilsan West Police Station formally reopened the case, this time treating it as a potential homicide. Let's take a closer look at this case and go back to the date that it happened, which was mostly recorded on cell phones. It's June 30th, 2019. A warm, humid day. 28-year-old Lee Eun-hae and her husband, Yoon Sang-yeep, and a group of friends set out for a weekend at the valley in Gapyeong. Known for its waterfalls and calm waters, it's a popular getaway spot for people looking to escape city life. The group booked a pension, a type of guest house in South Korea that blends indoor accommodations with a glamping-style experience. The area was well equipped with camping facilities, grilling stations, and electrical outlets. While it had a natural scenic feel, it wasn't completely remote. There were bus stops and businesses just a 20-minute drive away. Alongside Eun-hae and Sang-yeep were their longtime friends Cho Hyun-soo and 5 others. Dae-sol, a friend of Eun-hae, Jun-soo, a co-worker of Hyun-soo's, Yoon-young, Jun-soo's girlfriend, and Hyo-seop, a friend of Dae-sol's. At first, this seemed like a casual weekend getaway. But underneath it all, there were tensions, particularly in Eun-hae and Sang-yeep's marriage. While legally married, they lived separately. Eun-hae stayed in Incheon, a bustling coastal city, while Sang-yeep worked in Suwon. The official reason was the difficult commute. But as more details emerged, it became clear that commute was not the real reason. By 3 p.m., the group had settled by the water, inflating large floating tubes and organizing their supplies. Despite the summer heat, the water was cold. Most visitors had already left, leaving only a few people by the river. Sang-yeep, who had previously admitted that he couldn't swim, climbed onto a tube near the shore. The water was shallow at first, but dropped off quickly towards the middle, far deeper than he could stand. He was visibly uneasy, but Hyun-soo dismissed his concerns and began pulling the tube further out. Sang-yeep held on tightly, protesting as Hyun-soo dragged him deeper. Then Eun-hae shouted, "Flip him." Hyun-soo laughed and tried to overturn the tube. Sang-yeep resisted, pleading for them to stop. Hyun-soo called to Eun-hae, "I can't flip him, it's too heavy, help me." By now, Sang-yeep was panicking. His fear obvious, but instead of stopping, Hyun-soo kept pushing him further into the deep water. The group started chanting the Jaws theme. Hyun-soo shook the tube, acting as if he was going to flip it over. Sang-yeep was overwhelmed and begging for them to stop. His distress was clear, yet they continued. Eun-hae and Hyun-soo seemed to take pleasure in testing his limits, bullying him, ignoring this obvious fear. After several minutes of this, they finally stopped. Sang-yeep insisted he wasn't having any fun, and the group reluctantly returned to shore, laughing off his distress. An hour after the earlier incident in the water, the group moved to the parking lot to dry off. Hyun-soo suggested cutting open the watermelon they had bought, but they quickly realized they had forgotten a knife. Instead of finding another way, Hyun-soo proposed a game of rock, paper, scissors to decide who would smash it open with their head. The group eagerly agreed, but it was clear they had already made up their mind who would carry this out. Eun-hae lost the game of rock, paper, scissors, then turned to her husband and pressured him to do it for her. Under the peer pressure, and his wife asking him directly in front of everyone, how could he refuse? Hyun-soo held the watermelon steady as Sang-yeep slammed his head into it, cracking it open. While he wasn't seriously injured, the act was humiliating, another moment reinforcing the unspoken power dynamic within the group. Eun-hae and others seemed to laugh and enjoy their control over him. As the evening went on, the sun began settling, and by 8:20 p.m., the darkness was creeping in. Hyun-soo, taking the lead, and 2 other men in the group, Jun-soo and Hyo-seop, decided to jump from a cliff into the water. The water below was dark, cold, and deep. Sang-yeep hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea, but the group wasn't having it. The men egged him on, and Eun-hae joined in. She put on a life vest, taunting him, "If you don't jump in, I will," implying that she was braver than him. Reluctantly, Sang-yeep jumped. Moments later, The others resurfaced, but Sang-yeep didn't. By 8:24 p.m., Eun-hae called 119, Korea's emergency number, reporting that her husband had drowned after jumping into the water. The Gapyeong Emergency Department arrived at 8:43 p.m., taking 19 minutes to navigate the narrow single-lane road leading into the valley. A second rescue team from 24 kilometers away arrived at 8:51 p.m. At 9:05 p.m., they found Sang-yeep's body and began resuscitation efforts. He had no pulse, no signs of breathing. After 15 minutes of CPR, he was transported to the nearest hospital at 9:22 p.m. They transferred him again to a larger hospital, where he was officially declared dead at 10 p.m. The autopsy confirmed the cause of death, drowning. Eun-hae told emergency responders that after realizing Sang-yeep wasn't resurfacing, she had thrown another inner tube into the water, hoping he would grab onto it, but the water was too dark to see anything. She also mentioned that her husband hated swimming, but had come on this trip to make her happy. But as the investigation progressed, witness testimonies and physical evidence would contradict her version of events, and showed a form of bullying that only got worse over months. 5 months after Sang-yeep's death, in December 2019, Eun-hae filed a claim against her late husband's life insurance policy, the payout, a staggering 800 million won, roughly $600,000. But Shinhan Life Insurance rejected her claim. The company had reason to suspect foul play. Their investigators flagged several irregularities, the most alarming of which was the timing of Sang-yeep's death. The life insurance policy had been signed in August 2017 and was set to expire on June 1, 2019. Just 4 hours after he died, Eun-hae, enraged by the rejection, took her frustrations online. She accused the insurance company of corporate corruption and fraudulent practices, and went so far as to contact Unanswered Questions, a hard-hitting investigative television show on SBS. The program was known for uncovering scandals, exposing criminals, and making national headlines. But its methods were sometimes controversial, and its reputation for sensationalizing crime made it both respected and feared. Her email, subject line bold and accusatory, "Illegal atrocities by large insurance companies are still happening," painted herself as the victim. She claimed she had been married to Sang-yeep for 8 years, but his death was a sudden accident, and that she was now battling a ruthless insurance company trying to rob her of what was rightfully hers. She pleaded with the show to investigate, confident that media attention would turn the tide in her favor. The production team, intrigued, decided to take a look. Eun-hae, so desperate to be heard, suddenly vanished. She stopped responding to calls and emails. Days passed, then weeks. The more the team tried to reach her, the more elusive she became. With no further cooperation from Eun-hae, the production team had no choice but to halt their investigation, at least for the time being. Time passed. The Unanswered Questions production team had long since shelved the case, until something caught their attention. A news article about Sang-yeep's death surfaced, describing the circumstances as an unfortunate accident. According to the report, Sang-yeep had drowned after jumping into the water, his foot trapped between jagged rocks beneath the surface, but buried within the online comments was a clue that led them on a completely different path. A user accused Eun-hae of collecting a large insurance payout following her husband's death. The same comment hinted at a massive debt looming over her. The production team decided to take another look. Their investigation revealed that Ilsan Police Station had quietly reopened the case and was now treating it as a possible homicide. Eun-hae wasn't just a grieving widow battling an insurance company. She was now a murder suspect. The police had been tipped off by Shinhan Life Insurance, the same company that had denied her claim. Their concerns about fraud had turned into something darker. A pattern was emerging, and both law enforcement and journalists wanted answers. Determined to uncover the truth, the Unanswered Questions team turned to people who knew Sang-yeep best, his family. His older sister painted a picture starkly different from the one Eun-hae had presented. According to her, Sang-yeep had been 39 years old at the time of his death, a dedicated employee at a research company for 15 years. He earned a comfortable salary, lived a modest lifestyle, and was known for his kind-hearted nature. Then there was Eun-hae. She was 11 years younger, and Eun-hae had claimed their relationship began when she started working at his company as an intern. She had no university degree, only a high school diploma. But despite her lack of formal qualifications, she had supposedly secured an internship at the firm, or so everyone thought. The truth? No one at the company could even recall Unhai ever working there. Sang Yip's former colleagues insisted she had never been an intern. The story of how they met, the foundation of their relationship, was a lie. Despite being together for years, Sang Yip's family had never met Unhai's parents. His sister recounted how they had repeatedly asked to arrange a formal meeting, only for Unhai to constantly dodge the subject. It was as if she was hiding something or someone. A marriage built on deception, a widow fighting for insurance money, a death that now seemed far from accidental. As investigators dig deeper, a troubling picture of Sang Yip's financial life began to emerge. On paper, he should have been financially stable. His job at a prestigious research firm provided a steady, decent salary. But in reality, he was drowning in debt. In 2018, Sang Yip filed for bankruptcy. His financial records painted a bleak story. A man earning a respectable income, yet barely surviving. On paper, he should have been comfortable. His annual salary of 64 million won, around 48,000 US dollars, was more than enough to sustain a modest lifestyle. And yet, in 2018, he filed for bankruptcy. His bank statements told a devastating story. Month after month, his income drained into the same black hole, Unhai. She had convinced him she needed the money to help her parents, to pay off debts. But when Sang Yip's family reached out to Unhai's parents, they had never received a single cent from her. When Sang Yip's private text messages were uncovered, they revealed the harsh reality of his life under financial strain. Despite working full-time, he was barely able to afford food. He relied on the free lunch provided at his workplace, often skipping breakfast and dinner. Weekends were even worse, and some days he simply didn't eat. In one heartbreaking text, he begged a friend for just $5. While he starved, Unhai thrived. She was living a life far beyond her means, traveling abroad, spending lavishly, and showing no signs of financial distress. Sang Yip was even wearing torn shoes whilst Unhai basked in luxury. And this is all with his own money, working as a slave just to please her. And it wasn't like she wasn't aware of Sang Yip's dire situation. Investigators found text messages where he begged her for some money, so he could prevent the electricity being turned off. And when they looked into his home, they found it almost barren, the fridge with just some leftovers from long back, with barely anything in the house. Then looking into the apartment's CCTV footage, investigators found that just a few days after his death, she had appeared with the same man making fun of Sang Yip. Together, they had removed almost anything valuable he had left behind, and none of this was ever returned to his parents. They were financially draining Sang Yip bone dry, even after his death. Sang Yip was so financially broke that he was willing to sell his kidneys in order to survive. In 2019, Unhai had registered Sang Yip for 4 separate life insurance policies. The total payout, 800 million won. Given the timing of these policies, paired with his financial desperation, the implications were clear. This wasn't just an unfortunate accident. This was premeditated. Sang Yip's family organized traditional funeral rites to mourn his passing. Friends, colleagues, and loved ones gathered to say their final goodbyes. But as they spoke to those who knew him, they uncovered another shocking truth. Sang Yip had a child, or so they thought. The family learned for the first time that Unhai had a 9-year-old daughter, a child from a previous relationship. Just a year before his death, Sang Yip had legally adopted her. Sang Yip had played virtually no role in the child's life. There were no family photos, no father-daughter moments. To those closest to him, it was as if the adoption had been purely transactional. Then came Unhai's bizarre behavior at the funeral. She attended alone. Her daughter was nowhere to be seen. None of her family members showed up either, and she offered no explanation. And then, just a month later, Unhai's social media painted an unsettling contrast. While Sang Yip's family was deep in mourning, she was posting selfies, lounging poolside, enjoying lavish vacations. Yes, people grieved differently, but Unhai's actions raised alarms. Meanwhile, the Ilsan police station had made another discovery. Unhai had tried to kill Sang Yip before. 3 months before his death, she attempted to poison him with pufferfish toxin, a substance so lethal that even a minuscule dose could prove fatal. Somehow he survived. But it was clear, his death at Gapyeong Valley could not have been an accident. It had been premeditated murder. With all the mounting evidence, a warrant was out for Lee Unhai and Jo Hyun-soo's arrest. In December 2021, just as the walls were closing in, the two fled into hiding. The entire nation was watching. Their faces were plastered across the news stations. Authorities released public wanted posters, urging citizens to report any sightings. And for months, they eluded capture. Then, on April 3, 2022, the first break came. A tipster reported spotting a woman resembling Eun-hye at a subway station. Then, a former associate of Hyun-soo stepped forward. Hyun-soo had previously worked at an illegal brothel where he first met Eun-hye. Eun-hye had convinced Sang-yeop to invest in illegal sports betting, leading to crippling financial losses. Finally, on April 16, 2022, after 17 days on the run, Eun-hye and Hyun-soo were found in hiding in an office tel in Goyang. They had been living off cash, using burner phones, and avoiding the outside world. Neither resisted. Their days of running was over. With Eun-hye in custody, the full extent of her crimes began to surface. A 339-page investigative report exposed a shocking financial scheme. For years, Eun-hye had methodically drained Sang-yeop of every penny. 210 million won had been siphoned. The money was funneled into accounts belonging to Eun-hye, Hyun-soo, her father, and even 3 friends. By June 2018, Sang-yeop's debt had ballooned to 128 million won. Experts believe that Sang-yeop had been psychologically broken. 5 months before his death, in January 2019, he texted Hyun-soo, saying, Eun-hye's cruelest tactic, bringing Hyun-soo along wherever she spent time with her husband, breaking down his self-worth. By the time he died, he was the shell of a man he once was. Once investigators peeled back the layers, they found that Sang-yeop wasn't the only victim. Eun-hye had been orchestrating insurance scams for years. September 2017, just 6 months after marrying Sang-yeop, she traveled to Japan with another man. While there, she falsely reported her travel bag had been stolen and collected 1.5 million won in insurance. On May 2019, she used the same scam in Macau, claiming another theft and cashing in 2 million won. On April 2019, she signed up for a new insurance policy in Sang-yeop's name. And then on June 2019, just 2 months later, he was dead, and she collected 1.3 million won. 850 investigation records, and 41 witnesses called to testify. Yet despite the overwhelming evidence, Eun-hye remained defiant. She never apologized to Sang-yeop's family. She showed no remorse. She sat through the trial with a cold, expressionless demeanor. Medical examiners revealed that Sang-yeop had foam in his lungs, a telltale sign that he had struggled to breathe, desperately fighting to keep his head above the water before drowning. It was irrefutable proof that he hadn't just sunk silently, as Eun-hye had claimed. Her story that he had gotten his foot caught between rocks and slipped under without a sound was a lie. Eun-hye and Hyun-soo had lured Sang-yeop into the water, knowing he was a weak swimmer. No one tried to save him. It was cold, calculated murder. And the motive? Money. Her plan had always been to dispose of him, once he was no longer useful. Born in 1991, Lee Eun-hye was an only child raised in a poor household. Her parents, both disabled, relied on government subsidies to survive. Life was difficult, but for the first few years, Eun-hye appeared to live an ordinary life. Then, something changed. By middle school, neighbors began noticing her erratic behavior. She frequently ran away from home. July 2006, at 15 years old, Eun-hye and her friend engaged in prostitution with a man. While victims due to their age, this also marked the beginning of a long criminal history. Between 2008 and early 2009, she repeatedly committed crimes throughout Incheon metropolitan city. Her method was simple but effective. She would lure men to motels, pretending to agree to conditional encounters. Once inside, she would wait for them to shower, then she would steal their money, wallets, and valuables. By the time authorities caught up with her, she had stolen around 4 million won, approximately $3,000. On May 16, 2009, at 18 years old, Eun-hye was finally arrested and sent to the juvenile department. Since 15 years had passed, according to Korean law, her juvenile records were automatically destroyed. No one could say for sure what she had received. But one thing was clear: Lee Eun-hye had been a manipulator, thief, and liar long before she met Sang-yeop. And now, her past had finally caught up with her. By 2010, at just 19 years old, Lee Eun-hye was pregnant. But if anyone expected motherhood to change her, they were mistaken. Even while carrying a child, she continued her reckless and dangerous lifestyle. She was a regular at nightclubs, known for instigating fights and getting into violent altercations with other customers. Her aggression eventually caught up with her, She was investigated for assault. Then, on January 15, 2011, she gave birth to a daughter. The father's child? A former boyfriend who would never live to see his child. That same year, he died in a tragic accident at an intersection in Incheon. The circumstances of his death remain shrouded in mystery. Police never uncovered detailed records of the crash. Whether it was an accident or something more sinister remains an unanswered question. But one fact is undeniable. This would not be the last time a man close to Eun-hye would die under suspicious circumstances. By 2014, Eun-hye had moved on to other relationships, this time with her common-law fiancé, known only as Lee Mo. The couple had plans to marry. Then came the trip to Pattaya, Thailand. It was meant to be a romantic getaway. Instead, it turned into a fatal excursion. While snorkeling, Lee Mo drowned. An autopsy confirmed water in his lungs and detected a small amount of alcohol in his system. The official ruling? Accidental drowning. But something didn't sit right. His cell phone was missing. It was never recovered. His family, not Eun-hye, received the insurance payout. And this was the second time a man romantically involved in Eun-hye had died under mysterious circumstances. At the time, authorities found no direct evidence of foul play. But in hindsight, Lee Mo's death looked eerily similar to what would later happen to Young Sang-yeop. By now, Eun-hye had perfected the art of deception. She was a master of luring men, using them, and discarding them when they were no longer useful. Multiple sources, including testimonies from former acquaintances, suggested that Eun-hye's live-in boyfriend, Jo Hyun-soo, was more than just a lover. He was her pimp. Operating what was essentially a one-person prostitution business, Jo Hyun-soo managed Eun-hye's clients, controlled her earnings, and facilitated her encounters. Given her history, dating back to her teenage years of engaging in conditional encounters, it was presumed that she continued to work this line of work well into adulthood, even after meeting Sang-yeop, even after marrying him. Eun-hye later claimed that she met Sang-yeop through a chance encounter. The truth? She likely met him the same way she met so many others, through a paid sexual encounter arranged via an online chat room. The report suggested this happened around 2007 or 2008. By March 2017, the two had officially registered their marriage. By April 2022, just weeks after Lee Eun-hye's arrest, a shocking and disturbing trend emerged online. On Kakao Talk, South Korea's most popular messaging app, fan chat rooms dedicated to defending and glorifying Eun-hye began to appear. One such group, which had around 30 participants, a message was pinned to the top chat: hate the sin but not the sinner. Another chat room showed crime is not important. Your face is important. If you're pretty, everything is forgiven. While Eun-hye was idolized, her accomplice, Jo Hyun-soo, was mocked and ridiculed. He was branded a loser, a pawn, a disposable sidekick. The amount of simping that was going on online was just disgraceful at these men throwing themselves at this woman simply because she was attractive. In March 2002, a 6th grade Eun-hye appeared on MBC's Sunday Night Love House. The episode depicted her as a devoted daughter, caring for her disabled parents, earning viewer admiration for her dedication. This, of course, starkly contrasted with her later criminal actions, shocking many who recalled her earlier compassionate image. Sang-yeop's family moved to annul Eun-hye's adoption of his daughter and sought to retroactively void the marriage, preventing her from accessing insurance funds. Eun-hye's decision to involve the investigative program unanswered questions backfired, leading to the exposure of her crimes. Ultimately, Eun-hye received a life sentence plus an additional year for evading arrest. Her accomplice, Jo Hyun-soo, was sentenced to 30 years in prison plus 1 year for fleeing. On September 21, 2023, the Supreme Court dismissed their appeals, upholding Eun-hye's life sentence and Hyun-soo's 30-year term. And on October 31, 2024, further appeals were dismissed. Case 4. This case uncovers what might just be the most prolific serial killer in the history of Thailand. And what's even more disturbing is how the elaborate schemes allowed this serial killer to continue to prey on the grieving families of their victims. She planned and executed a series of murders over more than 8 years by poisoning her victims. She manipulated the circumstances to make their deaths look like natural heart failures, ensuring that their families wouldn't suspect foul play. Her motive centered around financial gain, either inheriting her victims' properties or profiting off their debts. Doing this all under the pretense of offering to help them settle their debts or pursue lucrative financial opportunities that she would bring forward to them. We begin with around 10 or 11 in the morning. A woman was walking down to the riverbank to release some fish, a popular practice known as ploy pla. It is believed to bring merit and good karma. But then, suddenly, she fainted and collapsed to the ground. Bystanders quickly gathered to help, finding the woman unconscious. Emergency services were called immediately. By the time the paramedics arrived and attempted CPR to revive her, the woman had already passed away. The medical team suspected cardiac and pulmonary failure, likely an accident, as the cause of death. The woman was identified as Ms. Sirapan Kawang, known as Koi. She was a 32-year-old successful businesswoman from Kanchanaburi province. However, her parents believed that Koi's mysterious death was more than it appeared to be. She had no known health issues. Furthermore, several of Sirapan's belongings, including cash, worth approximately $1,400, 2 phones, an iPhone 14 Pro Max, and an Oppo, her purse, and her car, were found to be missing, raising serious suspicions about the circumstances surrounding her death. At her parents' insistence, authorities took a closer look into Koi's death. Reviewing the CCTV footage from the area, it was evident that Koi had arrived at the river with her friend, A.M. Sarawat, also known as A.M. The two women had come to release fish into the river. Initially they walked together, but soon they parted ways. Koi continued towards the river, but at some point, A.M. crossed the road. You can see A.M. standing here, just watching the direction of the river. A.M. appeared to be searching for something. After pacing around for a while, she appears to ask someone something. She seems confused and pointing in the other direction. Then she paces to the end, again appearing lost and exhibiting strange behavior considering she's meant to be with a friend. Then the footage showed her running to the car, retrieving an item, and then heading down the stairs towards the riverside where Koi was. However, after reaching the stairs and soon after, A.M. walked back up, got into the car, and drove off as if nothing happened. To call this behavior strange is an understatement. According to Koi's family, she and A.M. had planned to release the fish together. So why did A.M. leave when Koi collapsed? Why wasn't she there to help her friend? Why didn't she stay behind to assist? I'm sure this and many other thoughts were racing through their mind. The police recovered Koi's car at the residence of one of A.M.'s acquaintances. According to the CCTV footage, Koi drove the car to A.M.'s place, and from there, A.M. drove both of them to the riverside. However, Koi's other missing belongings, including her cash, phones, and purse, were still not found. When questioned by the police, A.M. initially denied being at the river on the day. However, when confronted with the CCTV evidence, her memory seems to have returned, and she admitted to being there. A.M. explained that she left the scene because she had some urgent matters to attend to. She claimed she believed that Koi was feeling unwell, and seeing that many people were assisting her, she simply assumed her friend would be fine. As for Koi's belongings, it was later revealed that A.M. had mailed Koi's missing items to one of her own friends, with the package sent out on April 19th. Amongst them were Koi's purse, her Oppo cell phone, and wallet. The rest were not found. What do you think? Do you believe her? Well, almost no one did, especially Mr. Rape Shaman Ruya. He would play an integral role in uncovering the truth behind A.M.'s actions. From the moment he reviewed the CCTV footage, he knew something was off, but even he could not have anticipated the full extent of what they would discover. If A.M. was indeed responsible for Koi's death, how did she do it? The most plausible method was poisoning. However, the initial toxicology report showed no signs of poisoning in Koi's system. Koi's mysterious death dominated the news, capturing widespread attention. Soon, phones at the news stations and police stations started ringing incessantly. Reports poured in from people claiming that their friends and family members knew A.M. and had also died under similarly mysterious circumstances after meeting her. Alarmingly, many of these victims were found with darkened nails when they died. There were at least 15 such victims before 2020 and 2023. Yes, at least 15 in the span of 3 years. If she was indeed responsible for these crimes, how did she manage to rack up such a body count and stay under the radar for so long? A.M. was arrested on April 23, 2023, and news of her case spread like wildfire. People speculated on all her potential victims, and then another woman came forward, and she had reportedly loaned A.M. 250,000 baht, approximately $7,300. She told police that she experienced chest tightness and loss of feelings in her hands. She had taken a pill offered by A.M. during a meeting at a mall in Kanchanaburi province. Fortunately, she was immediately taken to the hospital and is now safe. Let's take a closer look at who AM really is. At the time of her arrest, AM was 36 years old. Her ex-husband, Bidhan Rangasuwapan, was a police officer. After their marriage, they moved into the police accommodation and had 2 children together. Over time, Bidhan advanced through the ranks, eventually becoming a high-ranking lieutenant colonel. This career success brought an improved lifestyle for the family, prompting them to move into a new home. Although AM and Bidhan divorced in 2020, they maintained a close relationship, likely for the sake of their children. It's unclear when AM got a taste for murder, but amongst AM more than 10 suspected victims, one of them was reportedly her recent boyfriend. You'll see there's a lot of death under mysterious circumstances that follows Ms. AM. The boyfriend just a month before Koi's mysterious death, M's boyfriend, Mr. Day, passed away on March 12, 2023 at 1:30 p.m. under suspicious circumstances. The pathologist listed the cause of death as cardiopulmonary failure. It was AM who called the police, stating that she was his girlfriend and she was pregnant with his child. At the time, no one suspected foul play. It was later uncovered that on the very evening of Mr. Day's death, AM went on to celebrate her birthday with her friends. Who in their right minds would do that? AM also pawned Mr. Day's gold jewelry on March 18, 2023, just a few days after his death. Additionally, she took control of all his properties. At the time, Mr. Day's family did not find these actions suspicious, as they believed AM was pregnant with his child. She should inherit all his properties. Day's close friend, who requested to remain anonymous, was very suspicious of the cause of his death. And especially after, because AM packed up Day's room and removed all his belongings, the media spoke with this man, let's call him Mr. Kung. And he knew Mr. Day since childhood. He is convinced that the child that AM is carrying is indeed the one she had with his friend. Day met AM through a dating app in December 2022, and AM frequently boasted about her involvement in the money-lending business, claiming to pawn cars and land and engage in stock trading. She often bragged that her ex-husband was a deputy director, suggesting that if there were any issues that arose, she could rely on him to resolve them. May, Day's friend, recounted the day Day introduced AM to her for the first time on March 11th. After returning from work, she saw Day with a woman sitting on a marble bench at her house. At first, she wondered who the woman was, until she remembered Day had mentioned that his girlfriend was coming. That day, May noticed that Day's demeanor was strange, serious, and not very talkative, unlike his usual cheerful self. While the two of them sat together, it was AM who spoke more than Day, asking about Day's whereabouts and if there were any other women pursuing him, to which he replied he did not know. After the visit, the two left together. On the day that he died, AM called May to say something was wrong with Day, that he was bleeding profusely. When May arrived, she saw other people and AM in the room before the officers entered. Day was lying down, wearing only underwear with bloodstains on his mouth. She observed that Day's fingernails were dark, but his body was still warm. At that moment, she thought Day might have been under a spell or under the influence of drugs. Additionally, May noted that Day typically carried a lot of cash, but on the day he died there was less than 10 baht found in his pocket. Day had mentioned to his friends multiple times that he had actually seen AM kill someone before, describing her as an evil woman. Now because Day's friends were very suspicious of his death, they looked around, and that's when they found something that blew their minds. It was a bottle with a label marked UN 1680 or potassium cyanide. Cyanide is an extremely toxic compound that can cause death within minutes of exposure, making it one of the most lethal substances known. It is odorless and tasteless, which allows it to go undetected in food or drink, rendering victims unaware of its presence until it's too late. The rapid onset of symptoms, including difficulty breathing, confusion, and loss of consciousness, can lead to fatality in as little as 15 minutes, depending on the dosage and route of exposure. Special tests such as analyzing blood and tissue samples for cyanide ions or its metabolites are often required to confirm its presence, complicating the investigation into suspicious deaths. In Thailand, cyanide is primarily used in mining for the extraction of gold and silver through a process called cyanidation. Additionally, cyanide is employed in electroplating to coat metals with gold or silver. Although its use is regulated, cyanide compounds may still be used in some pesticides and fumigants. The forensics team was able to identify cyanide in a shared vehicle that AM drove with her ex-husband. Following this, they obtained and executed a search warrant at her ex-husband's house, where they discovered a large quantity of unlabeled drugs and empty capsules. Her ex-husband claimed he had no idea these substances were just lying around. Similar findings were also made at her mother's home. These substances were all confirmed to be cyanide. In May 2023, at the Bampong police station in Ratchaburi province, the autopsy report for known Koi came in. The report confirmed the presence of cyanide in Koi's body. AM refused to speak further with the police regarding Koi's death. When arrested, AM actually made the bold claim that Koi wanted to take drugs mixed with cyanide, and she was simply fulfilling Koi's request. She also stated that she was only able to obtain the cyanide because she acquired it from her now-deceased boyfriend. I swear I can't make this stuff up. The things that comes out of this woman's mouth are just completely unbelievable. I'm not sure how stupid she thinks the entire world is, getting caught red-handed and still blaming someone, and then the simple coincidence of everyone around her simply passing away from cyanide. As if it's the most abundant thing on this planet. I just don't understand this woman. She should have just kept her mouth shut. She may actually have a chance of a defense attorney doing something to help her out. But maybe it's not about that. Maybe it's about getting justice for her many victims. It's innocent until proven guilty. I could still be wrong. She could be innocent. But let me know what you think, and there's a possibility that she was set up. I just highly doubt that. The police examined all the victims and mapped out the connections, revealing that each of them was linked to AM in some way, primarily through financial ties. But what's really unbelievable to me is that a lot of the victims were actually police officers. They likely met AM because of her ex-husband's connections. And even if police officers weren't safe, then who is? AM even targeted high school friends. I guess anyone who was linked to her was a potential target. One of her many schemes was the Rotating Savings and Credit Association, or ROSCA. A ROSCA is a group savings system where members regularly contribute a set amount of money to a collective pot, which is distributed to one member on a rotating basis until everyone has received their share. This system relies on trust amongst its members and involves no interest, making it an accessible alternative to formal loans. ROSCAs are particularly common in Southeast Asia and assist individuals in savings for major expenses or emergencies. It's an alternative form of banking and insurance where individuals form a collective that helps each other out. While ROSCAs played a central part in many of AM's schemes, she utilized different financial schemes to prey on her victims, which banked on the fact that the victim wouldn't live to see a benefit from any of them. One example would be borrowing money from them, but at exorbitantly high interest rates, which would be lucrative for the victim if they actually survived to benefit. AM also had other loan shark scams related to gambling. In each of these transactions, it was really AM who was pocketing the money, the valuables and more, and fleeing to the next unsuspecting victim. One might think that Ms. AM would target the rich, but that's not the case here. She would target the desperate and needy. She seemed to know which scheme to use for which situation, and which target to maximize the financial gain on her end, even going far beyond what the victim had on hand. AM would test this out on individuals using ROSCA to determine if they had enough disposable income. Once she had qualified a victim, she would lure them using schemes which promised to make them more money through various means, such as investing in a business or even the ability to borrow some money by putting up a vehicle as collateral. Collateral which was lost when the victim unsuspectingly passed away. One such victim was Ms. Nataya. Her case unfolded in August 2020. You see, Nataya owned a Honda Civic and she pawned this off based on AM's advice for 150,000 Thai baht. They went out for drinks together that same evening. Nataya was found face down in the bathroom and her face appeared darkened. The family at the time did not suspect foul play, as the doctor attributed her death to circulatory and respiratory failure. Nataya had known AM for about 3 to 4 months at that time and had initially connected through ROSCA. But the real kicker here, folks, is that when she passed away, a company would contact her family and notify them that Nataya had actually pawned off the car. Many of the family members targeted this way were distraught and simply coughed up additional money to retrieve something back of their loved one. The victimized family members had lost not just a loved one, but on top of it had to pay additionally to retrieve a vehicle. They had no idea of the whereabouts of this money. But this money was actually with AM, who had tricked the victim beforehand to let her hold on to it, and she moved so quickly on eliminating her target that their family never found out. And of course Ms. AM disappeared with it all after. And this is pretty much how a lot of her schemes unfolded. This continued over and over again. But what really shocked me on the scheme involving cars is that the investigation revealed that some of Ms. Am's victims' families were unavailable to afford the price to reclaim their loved ones' vehicles, which then allowed Ms. Am to keep their vehicles, adding further insult to their family's suffering. But the most sickening part of this all is that Ms. Am even went so far as to hire a lawyer to demand additional payments from the victims' families, further exploiting their financial distress. I also wonder, was her lawyer intentionally involved in these schemes, or did they simply turn a blind eye for the sake of earning an extra buck? It begs the question. Let me know what you think in the comments. Ms. Am's MO for carrying out these murders is that she would invite them over to temples, religious ceremonies, fortune-telling, or meals. When they've met each other, Ms. Am would offer them food or drinks, but these were spiked with cyanide. It's said that during the COVID-19 pandemic, she even provided her victims capsules of medicine or diet pills. Many of these contain cyanide. It's actually very scary. You have to think twice before even drinking coffee that a friend has prepared for you. Police continue to find victims of hers who passed away from cyanide. For example, one passed away as recently as April 1st, 2023. Surveillance footage showed Am sitting next to a police officer, Nipa, at a temple during that time. Nipa had loaned Am a sum of money, and Am had taken her for fortune-telling at a temple, and this is what happened next. The investigators were determined to find out how Am was able to obtain this cyanide. Surprisingly, they were able to trace this cyanide to a shop selling it right in the middle of Bangkok. In fact, the shop had sold over 1,500 bottles, and it became apparent it wasn't even difficult to obtain this online. Damn, it really makes me wonder how many other crazy poisoners are there in Thailand. There's definitely other cases of cyanide poisoning from the country. Another method Am used to profit from her victims was through life insurance. Usually the victim would get a life insurance policy, which was collateral in case they couldn't pay Am back. Now, she would be entitled to the life insurance payout in case the victim passed away, and of course the victim would have to pass away of natural causes, which by using cyanide gave the appearance of this. Unless the victims were specifically tested for cyanide, they all appeared to die naturally, and Am was collecting the payouts left and right. With all these schemes, Am is suspected of swindling hundreds and thousands of dollars from her victims. Police found 180 bank accounts with 78 million baht, or $2.3 million according to Nation Thailand News. She could have been even richer, but she allegedly would lose a lot of her money due to her gambling addiction. Of course, I won't call her a victim, since all her money is blood money, in the most accurate sense of the term. General Surakath stated when arrested, she wouldn't admit to any wrongdoing. The police even arrested Am's ex-husband and her lawyer, but later the court dismissed their cases because they couldn't find any direct links between them and Am. Now, could Am get the death penalty? Possibly. General Surakath characterized her as a psychopath who has no conscience or guilt. If she is found guilty, he stated that she could become the worst serial killer in Thailand's history. Capital punishment is rarely handed down, but Am's case is exceptional. The most recent execution occurred in 2018, marking the first time since 2009 an execution has taken place in the country. However, if Am enters a not guilty plea, she might avoid the death sentence in exchange for life imprisonment. General Surakath emphasized that serial killers must remain in prison until they die because this type of person cannot coexist with society. At the time of her arrest, Am was 4 months pregnant, but she miscarried months later whilst in prison. Social media was not kind with the comments, some even stating that it's good that she lost the baby, but they just resented this woman so much. And it's not surprising because some of her victims were the family's breadwinners, and one had even recently welcomed a baby. Am has been swindling and murdering people since 2015, managing to do so without detection for years. Investigators believe Am got a taste for murder and her financial benefits through one of her earlier victims, a woman named Sai. Am offered to help Sai by looking after her properties while she lived outside of Thailand. One day, Sam returned to Thailand and Am was more than eager to pick her up from the airport. She took her to her condo. The following day, Sai was found dead. Afterwards, Am took Sai's house and sold it. Afterwards, Am sold Sai's house and pocketed the money. Research indicates that female murderers often seek benefits from close relationships, while male perpetrators are driven by factors related to violence or dark desires. But regardless of motives, her body count alone puts her in the same league as many other serial killers. Case 5. Donna Ellen Brown was born in Hollywood, Florida on November 10, 1963, to parents Sarah Jane Brown and Robert Cash Brown. The couple had 3 children, Donna, the oldest, along with 2 younger daughters, Jenny and Michelle. Donna was extremely close to both her parents and her sisters. With Donna being the oldest, she had a motherly instinct and a strong desire to have children of her own someday. The Browns were a tight-knit Jewish family. They lived a comfortable life, with Robert working as an insurance agent and Sarah Jane being a partner at Cornish Distributors, a newspaper distributorship in Middletown, New York. When Donna was 17, her parents divorced, and her mother, Sarah Jane, later married Ira Drescher. Donna was magnetic. She was extremely kind, outgoing, and made anyone she was around feel instantly comfortable. She was happy, and she loved making everyone around her happy as well. She would light up a room whenever she walked in. When Donna was 24, she was working as an operating room technician. Back then, blind dates were still a thing, and Donna's co-worker, Greg Winger, was talking Donna up about his brother, Mark, who had just returned from serving a year in Korea as a lieutenant. Greg offered to set them up on a blind date, and Donna agreed. Mark Allen Winger was born on November 26, 1962, in Elyria, Ohio. His parents, Jared and Sally Winger, were a technical manager for Eveready Products and a real estate agent, respectively. The Winger family was also Jewish and had 3 children. Mark was the youngest, along with his older brother and sister. Mark was ambitious and bright. He earned a bachelor's degree in physics from Virginia Military Institute and aspired to become a nuclear engineer. He was smart, attractive, and by the time he met Donna, quite successful, working as a physicist for a laboratory manufacturing company. Very impressive. And Donna thought so too. They hit it off instantly on their blind date. While Donna was vibrant and outgoing, Mark was quiet and reserved. And he was funny. He made Donna laugh. They began dating, and Donna's family liked him instantly. He was a perfect match for her. They seemed to always be touching, either holding hands or sitting close together. Donna was always bursting with energy, and Mark was like a balance with his calm, quiet demeanor. They were in love, and things were progressing. So well that in June of 1988, 6 months after they began dating, Mark proposed to Donna. She happily accepted. The families were overjoyed. Donna's sister, Jenny, laughed at how when someone marries one sister, he's married to all 3, because that's how involved they all were in each other's lives. They announced their engagement in the New York Times the following month. They got married the following year on March 4, 1989. Once they married, Mark got a job offer in Springfield, Illinois. The couple relocated there, and Donna got a job assisting a plastic surgeon at Memorial Medical Center. Springfield was the perfect place to raise children, especially in the neighborhood that the Wingers moved to. They were well known and well respected in both their neighborhood and in their community. By everyone's accounts, the Wingers were the perfect couple. They got great jobs, a nice home, and they were clearly in love. They had everything they could possibly want, except a child. The couple set out to grow their small family by having a baby. They tried for 6 years, but ultimately received the devastating news that Donna was unable to become pregnant. She had longed to become a mother for nearly her entire life. It was a heartbreaking blow, not just for her, but for Mark as well. He had also dreamed of having a large family. The news brought some tension into the home, but fortunately, their dream of not being able to have children would be short-lived. One day while Donna was at work, one of the doctors entered the room and shared that he had a teenage mother who was going to give her baby up for adoption. He asked if anyone in the room knew of anyone who wanted to adopt a baby. The Wingers were a perfect match, and Donna knew that it was meant to be. On June 1, 1995, Mark and Donna adopted a beautiful baby girl into their family. They named her Bailey Elizabeth Winger. How do you feel, Donna? I'm overwhelmed. And I just want her to know that it just so happens that the day she's coming home to us is the anniversary of our engagement of Mark and I. Oh, isn't that wonderful? Here comes our special delivery. Oh, look. Bailey was the light of their lives. Donna said that she knew the moment the baby was placed into her arms that she was hers. Their bond was instant and unmistakable. Her sister said it best when she reflected that becoming a mother was probably the best thing that had ever happened in Donna's life. Mommy's feeling very comfortable these days with Bailey, and I think we've sort of bonded a little bit. Oh, I think we've bonded a lot. Family and friends were there to show their love and support for the baby. One friend in particular, Deanne Schultz, who Donna had become close with at work at the hospital, was invaluable. She helped Donna learn the ropes of being a new mom and supported her with whatever she needed. This is my just the sweetest little niece. She was an instant aunt. She and her husband, John, would often spend time and go out with the Wingers. When Bailey was 3 months old, Donna took her on a trip to visit her family in Florida for a week while Mark was away on a business trip in Tennessee. Upon her return, her mother had ordered a shuttle to pick her up from the airport, not wanting Donna to have to worry about caring for anything other than Bailey during her travels. Once she arrived at the airport, she met up with the shuttle, and they set out on the 1.5-hour journey from the airport to the Wingers' home. Although it was a shuttle van, Donna and the baby were the only passengers that day, which suited her just fine to start. But not for long. Instead of the ride being one that helped Donna relax and enjoy a leisurely trip home, it did the opposite. The driver began speaking irrationally, sharing with Donna that he often spoke to a godlike spirit named Dom, and that he experienced visions of killings and other disturbing comments. He also began flirting with her, mentioning how he liked older women. He drove erratically and exceeded the speed limit. Donna was terrified. She wasn't certain how the trip was going to end, and just wanted to make it home. She did. Shaken, she shared her experience with Deanne, and then with Mark via telephone since he was still away on business. He was very concerned. He made Donna write down exactly what happened, including every detail of what the driver said. In the days following the encounter, they received strange calls at their home, where the caller would breathe and hang up. Mark was convinced it was the same driver and filed a complaint with a shuttle van company, BART Transportation, claiming that their driver was harassing them. The company suspended the driver, whose name was Roger. 6 days after the bizarre and frightening shuttle encounter, Mark was working out on the treadmill in the basement when he said he heard a loud bump or crash. Worried that Donna had either fallen or dropped the baby, he rushed upstairs to the master bedroom and found Bailey laying on the bed. Then, hearing screams from elsewhere, he grabbed his gun and rushed out to the hallway to find his 31-year-old wife on the floor, with a man striking her in the head repeatedly with a hammer. Mark aimed the gun at the intruder and shot him. "I can't understand you, slow down. Is the man still in your house? Please, my baby's crying. My baby's crying. I gotta go. I'll call you right back." The 911 operator called Mark back. "Hello? Winger? Yes. This is the police department. We've got officers en route. I need to know what's going on there. My wife is dying on the floor." "Okay, is she still alive?" "I think so." "Okay, we've got ambulance en route, and we've got police officers en route." "Where's the gun?" "I left it on the table." "It's on the table. It's on the table. Please come here. We've got people on the way." "Who is this man?" "I don't know who he is." "He's still inside the house?" "Yes, he's laying on the floor." "Okay, I gotta hold my wife. I gotta get to my wife." "Okay, are you Mark Winger?" "Yes, I am." "Yes, I am." "Okay, and your wife is Donna?" "Yes, she is." "When did the man come here?" "I don't know, a few minutes ago. I gotta get to my wife. Please just let me get to my wife. I won't hang up, okay?" "Okay, we've got an officer en route." "Okay, my door is open." "Okay." Officers arrived on the scene to find both Donna and the intruder lifeless on the floor but still alive. Donna was face down on the floor in the dining room, and several feet away, lying on his back, was the killer. The first officer on the scene, Officer Dave Barringer, aware that the victims would be whisked off for emergency treatment soon, promptly ran out to his car to retrieve his Polaroid camera and snap a few pictures of the crime scene and the victims. Shortly after that, the victims were indeed rushed off to hospitals for treatment. Police began questioning Mark. He described what happened and told officers that the hammer the intruder used in the attack was his, that Donna had left it out as a reminder to hang a hat rack. He explained how he was working out on the treadmill in the basement, heard commotion, then ran and found the baby on the bed in the master bedroom. He said Donna would never leave the baby like that. Then he heard Donna screaming, so he grabbed his gun, found the man beating Donna, and shot him. He said the man fell backward, landing on his back, but then began to sit up, facing him. So Mark shot him again. While he was recounting the events, Detective Charlie Cox entered the room. Mark asked Detective Cox who the strange attacker was, but the detective who had already retrieved the intruder's wallet and knew exactly who he was avoided his question. He asked Mark to focus on telling them what happened. After Mark asked Cox who it was, and of times without receiving an answer, he finally asked Cox if the intruder's name was Roger. Cox felt that he finally had to answer, and told him yes, that his name was Roger Harrington. Mark responded, "Oh my God, This is the guy that's been harassing us all week." He explained that Roger was a shuttle driver that engaged in a frightening conversation with Donna less than a week before that. He told them he had called Roger that very morning, telling him to stop harassing his wife, and that he had filed a police report against him. What Detective Cox was not sharing with Mark was that he was already very familiar with Roger Harrington. Cox happened to own a trailer park in town, and Roger and his wife had rented a trailer from him. There, Harrington had been involved in domestic disputes where Cox himself had to get involved. So he considered 27-year-old Roger to be quick to anger, which fit with what he was seeing. While being questioned, Mark asked detectives if he could have a Diet Coke. So Detective Doug Williamson, the other lead detective on the case along with Cox, went to the refrigerator to get him the drink. That's when he noticed a note on the refrigerator. It was the multi-page note that Donna had written detailing her account with the shuttle driver. It fit perfectly with what Mark had described. Outside the home, Harrington's car was parked on the wrong side of the street, facing oncoming traffic. In it, they found a note that had Mark's name and address, along with a time, for .30. Also in his car, they found a knife and a tire iron with black electrical tape around the handle. Inside the house, they found a yellow coffee mug and cigarettes on the kitchen table, both belonging to Harrington. They also found a hammer covered in blood. The detectives consoled Mark, assuring him that he had done everything he could to try to save his wife, but that both Donna and Harrington had not survived their injuries. Mark was inconsolable and called his rabbi to come help comfort him through the ordeal. Mark was also worried that he'd be arrested for shooting the attacker, but there was no cause for concern. He and his wife were considered the victims of this heinous attack. Far from a criminal, Mark was hailed a hero for shooting his wife's attacker. Officially, Donna's death was listed as a murder by Harrington, and Harrington's death was listed as justified homicide due to self-defense. The case was closed within 48 hours. After the murder, all hands were on deck from Donna's family to help ease the pain and transition for Mark and baby Bailey. Donna's mother and sister, while still grieving for their own tremendous loss, took turns traveling to Springfield to help Mark care for the baby. During the visits, they noticed that Mark was behaving strangely, not at all as they expected. He was drinking excessively and would watch movies that had incredibly violent face-to-face shooting scenes you would think he would avoid after having just encountered one himself. But they didn't want to judge Mark and allowed him to grieve in whatever way helped him. As far as they were concerned, Mark loved Donna unconditionally and fully, so they loved him and supported him. He was every bit as much of the family as Donna was. After about 4 months of Donna's mother and sister traveling to help Mark, they got to the point where they couldn't continue traveling and recommended to Mark that he look into getting a nanny. So he did. Her name was Rebecca Simic. 23-year-old Rebecca was sweet, caring, and pretty, and everyone loved her. Donna's mother and sister, who didn't expect to like the person who would care for Bailey given their high standards for her care, couldn't help but to love her. Rebecca loved and cared for Bailey with her whole heart, and they could see that. She was open and embraced the whole family, helping them stay a part of Bailey's life. Rebecca felt welcomed and supported by everyone involved, with one exception. Deanne, Donna's best friend, was still present and still offered her help with Bailey at every turn. But at some point her support became pushy. She insisted on being a part of Bailey's life, nearly to the point of trying to replace Donna, according to Rebecca. Rebecca mentioned her concerns about Deanne to Mark, but he dismissed it as Deanne still being hurt from the loss of her best friend. Mark loved Rebecca too. A lot. So much in fact that after less than a year of her nannying and several late-night talks and wine, Mark announced to Donna's family that Rebecca was pregnant. Mark was thrilled. Rebecca was pleased as well, but also surprised. Mark had told her that he wasn't capable of having children, so she had not prepared for that. The couple began planning their lives together. Mark started attending church with Rebecca and told her they could raise their children as Christians and that he would switch his faith to Christianity. When their family rabbi, Michael Datz, found out, he was shocked. He asked Mark how he could give up his entire life of Judaism. Mark replied, "Judaism is just too difficult and unforgiving." The rabbi responded, "Mark, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you need forgiveness for?" The couple's relationship flourished with Mark being the epitome of the perfect partner and ultimately husband. There's a view on our balcony and Prince Charming is cooking breakfast. It's very easy to understand why I'm going to marry this man. Mrs. Wenger found film for the first time. The couple married in Hawaii in October of 1996. Donna's family was crushed that their beloved Donna could so easily be replaced in Mark's life just 14 months after she was murdered. By all accounts, Mark had moved on with his life. He and Rebecca moved into a 4-acre home in the suburbs of Springfield, where over the next 3 years, they would have 3 children, 4, including Bailey. As their family grew, they began to pull away from Donna's family, which hurt them immensely. When Sarah Jane would get to see her granddaughter, she would often just begin to cry, reminded that her beloved daughter was not there to watch her baby grow. That would irritate Mark. He didn't want her crying around Bailey. At one point, Sarah Jane tried to give Bailey a necklace of Donna's, but Mark asked her to take it off because it made him feel bad. From that point on, relations with Donna's family only got worse. They did not get along. Then Sarah Jane received a letter from Mark stating that Bailey would no longer be calling her grandma. Heartbroken, she wrote a letter back pleading with him to reconsider, but he insisted that he was not going to allow Bailey to call her grandma. After realizing that Mark was no longer the person they knew, they came to the painful realization that they were being shut out of Bailey's life and had to accept it. But it didn't stop the grandparents from sending Bailey a card every year on her birthday. Bailey would ask Rebecca who Sarah Jane and Ira were. Rebecca would explain that they were Donna's parents and that they wanted to let her know that they loved and remembered her. Meanwhile, Mark appeared to have fully recovered from the murder, both emotionally and financially. Less than 24 hours after Donna was murdered, Mark submitted a claim against her life insurance policy and collected $150,000. He also applied for assistance from the Crime Victims Compensation Act and received the maximum that was allowed by the state at that time of $25,000. But that wasn't enough. In an attempt to make Bart pay for their negligence in hiring a homicidal driver, exactly 4 months after Donna's murder, Mark filed a multi-million-dollar wrongful death civil lawsuit against Bart Transportation and the Harrington estate. He claimed that Bart should have known that Harrington was dangerous and unfit for the job. That move would eventually prove to be one too many. Just 1 month after Winger filed the lawsuit against Bart, the detectives received a surprise visit from him. It struck them as odd since they normally never hear back from victims after a case is closed, particularly ones who are hailed as heroes. Mark claimed he wanted to see if he could get his gun back from evidence. They had no problems with returning the gun to Mark. But in the process, he started probing. He asked them how the case was going, if it was still open, if they were doing any further interviews, etc. Detective Cox found the inquiry suspicious. His suspicions were heightened even further when Mark visited the station a second time, bragging about getting remarried. Doug Williamson, the other lead detective on the case, had always had his suspicions about the murder, but was overruled by higher-ups who insisted the case be closed. Cox was now beginning to agree with his partner. They both wanted the case to be reopened, but the higher-ups still wouldn't allow it based solely on their gut feelings. They needed solid evidence, and they didn't have any, or so they thought. Mark's life had been completely transformed. He had a new wife, beautiful children, a sizable insurance payout, and even a promotion at his job in the Department of Nuclear Safety. He had distanced himself from his rabbi, his religion, and anyone who had anything to do with Donna. Things were going exactly the way he wanted them to go, until they were not. Facing a potential company-threatening settlement, Bart fought back. The company's attorneys launched their own investigation, which spanned years. Toward the end, they would be exchanging evidence with police and sharing the costs of forensic experts. Police were more than willing to do so because by that time, some 3+ years after the murders, someone was making their rounds and dropping bombshells along the way. It was Deanne Schultz, now named Deanne Anderson. Deanne had faced several devastating life challenges following Donna's murders, and it was all coming to a head. In October of 1998, just over 3 years after the murders, Rebecca took Mark to the ER when he wasn't feeling well. They ran into Deanne in the waiting room, and Deanne glared at Rebecca. After the encounter, Mark told Rebecca that they would probably hear from her again. Rebecca did not hear from her, but the police did. After seeing the couple at the ER, Deanne decided that she couldn't keep quiet any longer. Deanne had battled severe depression and other mental health issues brought on by her guilt about knowing the truth about Donna's murders. She had undergone every treatment known, to the point of utilizing electric shock therapy to treat it, being institutionalized and much more deadly encounters. So after the chance meeting in the ER, and upon her doctor's insistence, Deanne decided to come forward and confess to police all that she knew about Donna's murder. She visited police, and in exchange for immunity, she told them everything she knew. She shared that she had been having an affair with Mark, beginning just 1 month before Donna was murdered and continuing for 6 months afterward. Deanne claimed they were in love, and Mark had even gotten them wedding rings with plans for them to marry. They talked about divorcing their spouses, but Mark's response was that it would just be easier if Donna was dead. Mark told Deanne that all she would have to do is find the body while he was out of town. She told Mark, "I don't want to have anything to do with that. I would cease to be a vital person." Mark repeatedly mentioned Donna dying. So Deanne finally told him, "I am going to divorce John. You do what you have to do." She also shared that she called Mark at some point after she saw him at the ER to see if he would tell her he killed Donna and Harrington. While on the call, she asked him how he could live with himself. He responded that he had found Jesus Christ and that he was forgiven. Mark also told her that if she told anyone about the murders, their gooses would be cooked. And when referring to Harrington, he said, "Dead men don't talk," and that he didn't want Deanne to know the truth because ignorance is bliss. She said Mark threatened her not to tell anyone about the things he'd said, and she spent the last few years struggling with her guilt. Cox and Williamson were suspicious. They had interviewed Deanne on the day of the murders, and she had not mentioned any of this. So they checked the hotel records where she claimed they stayed, and they checked out. They also checked phone records, and found that the pair had racked up 845 minutes of phone conversations. They began re-interviewing people, including a nanny that the Wingers tried out before Rebecca. She told police that Deanne's husband, John, had called the Wingers home once looking for Deanne. The nanny went outside and saw that Deanne's car was in the driveway and told John. She came back inside and knocked on Mark and Donna's bedroom door, and Deanne came out a short while later. The nanny told Deanne that her husband was on the phone and wanted to talk to her. They also spoke to another friend of Donna's to probe further about the couple's marriage. The friend insisted that Donna spoke openly about her marriage, and everything seemed perfect to her. She did note that about 2 months before the murder, Donna felt that Deanne was beginning to become obsessive and suffocating. She said it felt like she was trying to move in on her and Mark's life. The friend also recalled how after Donna's death, Mark told her that he missed having a physical relationship and needed a woman's touch. The friend considered it a pass at her and became uncomfortable. Around the time Deanne was visiting police, Mark presented a demand of $1.5 million to Bart to settle their lawsuit out of court. The company was on the verge of making him an offer when they received a phone call from Deanne. Deanne called Bart attorney John Nolan. John asked who was calling, and she said she couldn't say, but that they should not settle with Winger. She told them she had just gone to the police, and the case was going to be reopened. Nolan was all ears, but she said she couldn't say anything further and hung up. The law firm had to call her ID. So Nolan called her back and told her, "You just told us not to settle." "Why?" She asked him how he got her number. "Call her ID." He threatened to subpoena her. So she agreed to come in and ended up giving them a 60-page sworn statement documenting the affair and everything else she knew of. Mark withdrew the civil suit, but the horse had already left the barn and was halfway to the courthouse. With Deanne's statements resulting in the motive that was always missing, the case was reopened. The first order of business was to revisit findings from the original investigation. But when detectives went to retrieve the evidence, it was missing. It had been turned over to Winger's attorneys years ago to be used in his civil case against Bart. Handing over evidence to Winger's attorneys was the first in a long line of missteps that law enforcement acknowledged. They headed to the attorney's office to retrieve the evidence. As they were wrapping up, the attorney asked them if they wanted the 3 Polaroids he also had. Detective Cox didn't recall any Polaroids, but said sure. They turned out to be the 3 Polaroid photos that the first officer on the scene snapped before the paramedics arrived and removed the bodies. He had submitted them, but no one ever got around to actually looking at them. Those 3 elusive photos turned out to be the most impactful pieces of evidence in the case. They showed that the position of Harrington's body was facing in the same direction as Donna's. But when Mark explained how he shot Roger, he said Roger was kneeling down next to Donna's head as he was beating her. He said he shot him and that Roger fell backwards so that his feet stayed near Donna's head. The Polaroids showed the exact opposite, and the blood spatter experts agreed. The pictures were irrefutable proof that what happened that night did not happen the way Mark said it did. As they explored the evidence, multiple questions surfaced. For starters, Roger's coffee mug and cigarettes on the kitchen table did make sense. Why would Roger bring coffee and cigarettes to a murder? Roger had 2 ideal murder weapons in his car, a knife and a tire iron already fashioned with a handle. If he had planned to murder Donna, Why would he have banked on a murder weapon being inside the home instead of bringing in one of the highly effective weapons he had in his car? Also in Roger's car was that note, the one that had Mark's name and address, along with a time, for .30. It seemed clear that the time was a meeting time. And why did it have Mark's name? Was killing Mark the original plan? Donna's body was found face down. If Mark had cradled her in his arms as he claimed, then why would he place her face down when he was done? Police also found it odd that Mark first went to the master bedroom. When you hear a noise, why would you go to your bedroom? Why not go to where the noise actually is? And virtually nothing that Mark described about the murder lined up with the forensic findings. From the blood spatter on Mark's shirt and not on Roger's, to the gun-spent shell casings that were not discharged, where he claimed to have shot Roger, to the location, position, and direction he said he shot him. None were consistent with findings. And then there's the 911 call. When police arrived at the scene, Mark told them that he shot Harrington twice, a few seconds apart. But at the time he made the first 911 call, he clearly referenced a single bullet he had fired. That was shortly before he bizarrely had to hang up with 911 while his wife lay dying, because his baby was crying. You can clearly hear Roger moaning in the background of the call prior to Mark hanging up. You could not hear him moaning afterward. And by the time paramedics arrived, there were 2 bullets in Roger Harrington's head. It also didn't help that Mark's version of the events seemed to vary each time he told someone. At one point, even adding in that he also struck Roger in the chest with a hammer because he was, quote, moaning and groaning. Detectives were also finding that there were quite a few people who had their suspicions about Mark and his actions around the time of the murders. Donna's father, Cash Brown, said that his son-in-law didn't act like a grieving widower. When they were taking a walk after the funeral, he said that Mark never shed a tear, as he described what happened during the murder, even though he could see that his father-in-law was crying. And both Donna's friends and family wondered why the front door was unlocked that afternoon, knowing that Donna always kept her doors locked. And according to Donna's father, one of Donna's sisters and a friend even tested out Mark's account of the events that night. One of them ran on the treadmill in the basement, while the other one fell to the floor upstairs. The person on the treadmill could not hear anything over the sound of the treadmill. In December of 1999, as both Bart and police's investigations were well underway, Springfield's local daily newspaper ran an article based on the claims that Bart made in the civil lawsuit against them. Based on the findings of the blood spatter expert, Bart claimed that Winger was the orchestrator of the murder, not Harrington, and that Winger had killed both his wife and Harrington. The article did not alarm the police or Bart, who were already knee-deep into their investigations, but it most definitely alarmed Mark and Rebecca. Rebecca couldn't believe that law enforcement was wrongly targeting her husband. She stood by his side, believing they would ultimately look into everything and her husband would be cleared. Investigators were indeed busy working on the case, but not necessarily to clear her husband. With the evidence law enforcement was gathering, the events of that devastating day came into focus. A month before the murders, Deanne Schultz confided in Donna that she was having problems in her marriage and was considering getting back together with an ex-boyfriend and moving to Minnesota. Donna tried to help Deanne through her marital problems and talk her out of moving, but at some point thought that perhaps a man's perspective could help Deanne. So she asked Mark if he would talk with her. Mark agreed, and he arranged for the two of them to meet halfway between her home and his current business trip location. They did. The affair began that night at a hotel and continued from there. They would talk on the phone 2 to 3 times per day and romantically connect in hotels, in cars, and in their own homes whenever they could. Their respective spouses were completely in the dark about the affair, even as they all continued to go out together to dinners and gatherings. As far as Donna knew, she had the most loving, devoted, kindest husband a woman could ask for. She set off to visit her parents for a week while Mark was away on business. She returned to face the unpleasant shuttle ride home with Roger Harrington. Despite the ride being a troubling one for Donna, Roger was optimistic about his future. He was proud of his new job with Bart, and he loved the van that he drove. The terrifying shuttle ride fell right into Mark's lap. He leaped at the opportunity to turn Harrington into a scapegoat. As soon as he heard of the incident, he insisted that Donna fully document every detail. Then, 2 days after the shuttle ride, he asked his coworker what would happen to their baby if Donna died before the adoption process was complete. 3 days after the shuttle ride, referring to Roger Harrington, he told Deanne, "I need to get that guy in my house." That same day, he called Ray Duffy, the owner of Bart, to complain about the driver. He asked Duffy for Roger's last name and said he wanted to talk to the driver directly. Finding the request unusual, Duffy refused and said that he would talk to Roger. Roger was eager to work things out, so he gave Duffy permission to give his phone number to Winger. On the day of the murders, Mark called Deanne at work and asked her, "Will you love me no matter what?" She replied yes, and he made another call on the day of the murder. To Roger Harrington, Roger's roommate, was there when he received the call, and it was very clear that Mark called Roger that morning to invite him to his house, not to warn him to stay away as Mark claimed. Roger was eager to work things out with Winger and get his job back. He told both his roommate and another witness about the meeting prior to heading out at about 3:30. According to the crime scene analysts and blood spatter experts, once Harrington arrived and was inside the home, Winger likely forced Harrington to his knees and shot him from the back of his head. Hearing the shots, Donna came rushing to the room and Mark beat her to death with a hammer. He then called 911, but midway through the call, Roger began moaning in the background, trying to live. Mark concocted a flimsy excuse for hanging up so that he could finish Roger off without 911 hearing the final gunshot. A delay in between the two shots was consistent with both forensics, as well as a neighbor's report that she heard the two shots about 5 minutes apart from each other. Police reclassified the killings as a staged domestic homicide. Roger Harrington was not a murderer, but a victim who Winger lured to his home to kill him and frame him for his wife's murder. On August 23, 2001, Mark Winger was arrested at his job. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and held on a $10 million bail. Mark asked a childhood friend to help him post bail, but the friend refused. With Mark Winger's arrest, the man who originally helped hail him a hero was now committed to proving him a heartless murderer and vindicating Roger Harrington. Roger's innocence was no surprise to the Harringtons. They never for a minute thought that the allegations against him were true, even when the case was closed. His mother insisted that despite his mental illness, he was not a violent person. And according to his sister, Barbara Howell, he was the kindest soul you'd ever encounter, someone who would do anything for you, noting that if she needed a gallon of milk in the middle of the night, he'd be eager to run and get it for her. And how the last time she saw him, he had stopped by to pick up baby clothes for a friend who didn't have much money. His family insisted his mental illness impacted what he said, but not his actions. His sister recalled the domestic altercation Detective Cox referred to, noting that during Roger's rocky marriage, he came home one day to find his wife and her ex-husband throwing his belongings out of their home. Roger understandably became upset and got into an altercation with the ex-husband. His wife tried to get in the middle of it, which is when Detective Cox showed up to break apart, explaining his perspective about breaking up the domestic dispute. Trisha Ray, whose mother owned another trailer Roger rented, tried to convince police that Roger was harmless, even gentle and kind. She said, "It was frustrating that no one would believe us. I know what the police were thinking. Here's this man with a good name and a good job, living in a nice house. And look at us. They thought we were trailer trash and Roger was crazy." Despite his run-ins with the law, court and hospital records show that while Roger was depressed and delusional, he was determined to never pose a threat to anyone but himself. As Winger's trial began, police acknowledged that they made grave errors during the first investigation, including throwing out blood evidence, returning Winger's gun to him, and turning over crime scene photos, the hammer and other evidence to Winger's attorney. But their second investigation was solid. The prosecution set out to prove that Winger meticulously plotted and carried out luring Roger Harrington to his home, shooting him, beating his wife to death, then framing Harrington for the murder. Rebecca was confident right up until the end that the 12 jurors would see through to the truth and find her husband not guilty, so he could come home. They did not. After 3 weeks of testimony and 13 hours of deliberation, on May 29, 2002, 6.5 years after Donna Winger and Roger Harrington were murdered, a jury found Mark Winger guilty of the 2 counts of first-degree murder. One of the jurors would later remark that if you're going to go over to kill somebody, you don't bring a pack of cigarettes and something to drink and just hope that the murder weapon is going to be there. But jurors overall said that the state's best evidence was the first evidence police ever collected, the 3 Polaroids. Mark Winger was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On the 6th anniversary of Roger's death, his family placed a small classified ad in the newspaper in memory of Roger. It read, "Although your death has interested many, it is your life we truly miss." Roger's father, Ralph Harrington, died in 2010. He lived to see that his son was vindicated, even honored, and saw his son's killer placed behind bars. To honor their daughter's death, in 1988, Sarah Jane and Ira Drescher raised funds for a new hospital wing in Joe DiMaggio Children's Hospital in Hollywood, Florida. They named it Donna's Playroom. The Dreschers also established Donna's Fund at the Women in Distress Shelter in Broward County, Florida, to help victims leave abusive relationships. It provides them with funds for security deposits, babysitting, furniture, and more to help them transition to new lives. Mark Winger was sent to serve out his sentence at a correctional center called TMS, then later moved to Menard, then finally to Western Illinois Correctional Center, where he is currently serving. He filed multiple appeals of his conviction, one of which made it to the Illinois Supreme Court. He lost. In stark contrast to his slight figure when he entered prison, the 215-pound, now tatted Winger mounted a multi-year legal fight over where he could exercise. He'd argue that being required to stay in his concrete-walled cell all day was causing him anxiety, depression, and panic attacks, and that it constituted cruel and unusual punishment. He complained that running in place and doing jumping jacks in his cell caused his knees to hit the wall or bunk. Sit-ups made his bed too sweaty, and the floor was too dirty for push-ups. He lost. Then in 2006, for years after his conviction, 48-year-old Winger was indicted for attempting to hire a fellow prisoner, Terry Hubble, to murder two people, Dan Anderson and the childhood friend who refused to post his bail, Jeffrey Gelman. The original plan was for the hitman to kidnap Gelman, who Winger resented for refusing to post his bail. They would demand a ransom by threatening to harm his family. That plan later changed to simply killing him. Dan was to be kidnapped and forced to write and record lengthy statements that Winger had scripted, stating that Winger is innocent, that she lied and made everything up. The hitman would then kill her. He documented the entire plan in a 19-page handwritten document. He gave the document to Hubble, who turned it over to authorities and began working as an informant in exchange for being transferred to a more comfortable prison. Winger's 19-page document covered every detail, including ensuring that only Dan S. fingerprints would be on the letters and envelopes, and that her saliva had to be on the stamps. He tried to claim that he was just fantasizing and that it was all a setup, but his recorded conversations included statements like, "Here's the thing. Look at all I did. In all my own handwriting. There's things that only I would be able to put in this whole thing. The only one who stands to gain is me. It all points to me. I get busted right along with you. There's no way that I would not be implicated." For his trial, he wrote a statement to the court that read in part, "I am exceedingly sorry for my foolishness in sharing my fantasies with Terry Hubble, and I regret that my incarceration has so affected my judgment that I would write down my fantasies as a diversion and then be idiotic enough to trust those writings in the hands of Terry Hubble." This time, the jury took less than 3 hours, including lunch. Mark Winger was found guilty and sentenced to an additional 35 years on top of his life without parole sentence. He appealed that conviction as well and lost again. Winger has filed at least one other case against the prison as recently as 2023, and based on his pattern, is bound to file more. After Mark's conviction, Mark and Donna's daughter, Bailey, continued being raised by Rebecca. Rebecca divorced Winger and had her and her children's names legally changed from Winger to her maiden name, Simic. She described it as a symbolic step to be seen for who she is and not who he was. The home she had bought with Winger was foreclosed, and Rebecca, who had been a stay-at-home mom for 7 years, filed for bankruptcy. She moved her and her children out of Springfield and moved in with her brother, while she established a new career, credit, and a new life. She now opens up about having been the wife of an incarcerated murderer, and she and her kids collaborate with big brothers, big sisters, to support children growing up with incarcerated parents like hers did, she stated. "No one seems to think about the family when someone is incarcerated. I call them living victims. It's a humiliating, embarrassing role to play, although you have done nothing wrong." Rebecca and the children look back on their childhood videos with hindsight clarity, analyzing Mark's actions and seeing him for the evil person that he truly is. While Mark had worked to keep Bailey away from Donna's family, in 2019, Rebecca worked with Donna's family to bring them back together, fulfilling what they all knew Donna would want for her family to be part of Bailey's life. Bailey now calls Sarah, Jane, and Ira her grandma and grandpa. We hope this video did justice to Donna Winger and Roger Harrington. Donna's mother said that Mark is like a chameleon. And it's that exact fact, that chameleon factor, that makes this case so terribly frightening. Case 6. Feline Eves Grant was born on December 31st, 1965, in Show Low, Arizona. She later grew up in Mesa, Arizona, where she lived with her mother, Glenna Lee Johnson Eves, stepfather Doug Eves, 2 sisters, Jody and Shirlene, and a brother, Duggar. They were devout Mormons, and Feline was known for her kindness and generosity, and for her deeply rooted religious beliefs. Her sunny disposition made people feel welcome and loved, which earned her many friends and admirers. In 1986, when Feline was 22, she married Philip Curtis Stradling, who went by Kurt. The couple had 2 children, Jenna and Austin. Given her deep faith, Feline often sought guidance for major life decisions through fasting and hours of prayer. She let her faith and belief in personal revelation guide her decisions, including eventually divorcing Kurt, which she felt was divinely inspired. As she grew older, Feline's passion for health and wellness became another defining feature of her life. She took pride in maintaining a healthy lifestyle, embracing fitness and nutrition as part of her daily routine. It was her commitment to fitness that connected her with her future husband. In 1993, Feline met Doug Grant, a charismatic businessman who owned a thriving nutrition company. Like Feline, Doug was also a single parent and was also in the process of a divorce. He also had a son named Bowen. Doug was an ambitious innovator in the world of nutrition and fitness who worked with several high-profile clients, including professional athletes from the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Phoenix Suns. Also like Feline, Doug was a member of the Mormon faith, specifically the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The two bumped into each other at a gym, and having actually attended high school together, they quickly reconnected and bonded over their mutual interest of fitness, nutrition, single parenthood, and their faith. The couple began dating and married later that year, 4 months after Doug's divorce was final. They expanded their family with 2 more sons, Marley, born in 1994, and Braven, born in 1997. From the outside, they appeared to have an ideal life, one which was rooted in shared values, faith, and success. While Feline's faith brought her comfort, it also strongly influenced her decisions. She had an unwavering belief in divine messages, interpreting her visions as communications from God meant to guide her path. These beliefs had already impacted her first marriage, with her feeling that she was divinely inspired to divorce her first husband, Kurt. And similar impressions later led her to suspect Doug of cheating. When she confronted him, Doug admitted to having had multiple affairs despite strict teaching by the LDS against infidelity. Coupled with his admission, Feline experienced additional visions that convinced her that divorcing Doug was necessary. It was part of a divine plan that she could not ignore. She told Doug about her visions and asked for a divorce. Despite his affairs, Doug is reported to have been devastated when Feline filed for divorce as he valued their faith and family life. But honoring her wishes, he granted her the divorce, and the two parted ways in June of 2000. Doug's path led him straight into the arms of his newly hired 19-year-old receptionist, Hillary DeWitt, who was also a Mormon and was 16 years his junior. Despite the split, Doug's company remained a family affair. 5 of Feline's relatives held senior management roles, including her parents, 2 siblings, and her sister-in-law. Interestingly, Feline's brother, Duggar, was the hired Hillary shortly after Feline filed for divorce, and the two of them began dating soon afterward. Many were surprised by Doug and Hillary's relationship, pointing out their significant age difference and what some perceived as a physical mismatch. Hillary's cousin even mentioned that she told her, "He's like a little man. He's old. He's bald. Why? You're beautiful." She said Hillary replied, "He's sexy and powerful." But before that relationship had a chance to advance too far, Feline had a change of heart. In early 2001, she and Doug met in Dallas to attend mediation for a civil lawsuit where they were both plaintiffs. While they were there, they discussed the possibility of getting back together. Doug returned to Hillary and told her he needed to work out his feelings, while Feline headed to a temple to pray and ask God what she should do. She told Doug that getting back with him would take an angel from God coming down and telling her to do so. But despite the magnitude of that requirement, she called Doug early the next morning and told him that while she was in the temple praying, God did indeed tell her that she needed to remarry him. Hillary, who was there when he received the call, having just stayed the night with him, was crushed. And he came out of the bathroom and I was standing there and I said, "It's over, isn't it?" And he said, "It's over." Doug ended his relationship with Hillary to remarry Feline. They got married a few months later in Las Vegas, 1 year after their divorce. But life after the remarriage was far from smooth. Feline often turned to her journal, filling its pages with thoughts, prayers, and personal reflections of everything happening in her life. It was her means of processing her emotions and seeking divine guidance. But at some point, her writing took a darker turn. She had visions of her own death and began preparing for what she believed was God's plan. She wrote about being told by God that she was going to die and about feeling spiritually prepared to do so. Stale, Feline pressed forward, living her life and trusting in the path she believed God had set before her. 2 months into their remarriage, Doug and Feline set out for a second honeymoon to Mount Timpanogos, an area known for its alpine scenery and hiking trails. Once there, they set out for a hike. They were both enjoying the views when Feline experienced what she described as a spiritual vision, specifically Jesus in the clouds. According to Doug, Feline was eager to get a closer look and climbed over a rock wall to get a better perspective. She then lost her footing and fell. She fell approximately 60 feet, but miraculously she survived, only suffering cuts and deep bruises. No broken bones. A large pine tree is believed to have cushioned her fall, softening the impact and likely saving her life. Medical staff found it odd that she didn't have more serious injuries considering the height of the fall. Feline confirmed Doug's account of the events, describing how her knee buckled just before she fell. When she landed, she said she was conscious but dazed. She urged Doug to not take her to the emergency room, but he insisted. There, she was treated and released just over an hour later, sent home with medication for her pain. The couple stayed with a nearby friend for a couple days before flying back home to Arizona. What her loved ones did not know at the time was that in addition to the journal entries she had made preparing for her own death, she had also left notes of Mormon scripture throughout the house before she left on the trip and arranged personal items with notes on them to her loved ones about who should receive them after she's gone. But friends and family were completely unaware of the concerning notes. Their focus was on helping Feline physically heal. Doug even contacted his physician assistant friend Chad White to assess Feline's condition at their home. White observed that despite her minor injuries, Feline appeared in relatively good spirits. To manage her pain and sleep difficulties, he administered a pain relief injection and prescribed a muscle relaxant along with a prescription for a limited supply of Ambien tablets to help her sleep. White explicitly instructed Doug to not fill the Ambien prescription unless the muscle relaxant proved ineffective, emphasizing the importance of not combining the medications. White also told Doug to call him before filling the Ambien prescription if it ended up being needed. But sadly, as Feline had envisioned, her days were indeed numbered. Doug would find Feline the very next morning lifeless in their bathtub. On the heels of an already highly suspicious fall, investigators had questions. They started with the most concerning development, Feline's death. On the morning of September 27, 2001, Doug said he awoke and immediately found Feline submerged and unresponsive in their bathtub. He said that at some point in the middle of the night prior, Feline had awoken in pain, but either he or she was unsure of whether she had taken one of the Ambien to help her get back to sleep. He said that she later decided to take a bath because she had urinated in the bed. He said that he dozed off as she began drawing a bath. Doug said he began CPR on Feline and contacted his physician assistant friend Chad White. White then called 911 while en route to his home. White arrived and began CPR as well, but with nearly every compression, only water or vomit were expelled. Doug knelt nearby, wailing and sobbing. Paramedics transported Feline to a hospital in Meso, where she was placed on life support. Blood tests revealed that Feline had a high concentration of Ambien in her system, enough to render her unconscious. Despite medical efforts, doctors determined that her brain activity had ceased. Later that day, Doug authorized the removal of life support, and Feline was pronounced dead that afternoon. Doug provided police with Feline's journals as evidence that Feline had carried out her plan as described in her writings. Based on Doug's version of events, authorities classified Feline's death as an accidental drowning, but Feline's family wasn't so sure. While law enforcement found no evidence of foul play, her family felt that Doug's actions around the time of her death proved otherwise. And it began the moment he said he found his wife in the bathtub. Instead of calling 911, Doug chose to call his physician assistant friend. Once Chad White called 911 on his way to the Grants' home, he told the dispatcher, "I just got a distress call from a friend of mine who just called me. I don't know if he's already called you. He said his wife is unconscious, and she took all the medicine he had. His wife, I think she overdosed. I couldn't understand. He was frantic. He told me to get over there, because I'm a PA. Then I told him to call 911, and he said, I'm afraid to. I don't know why he said that. Then there was his stepdaughter Jenna's recollection of the morning, which conflicted with Doug's account. She reported to police that Doug had already been up and in the kitchen, probably getting some food for one of her little brothers before Faylene was found in the bathtub. While the statement from the 11-year-old, particularly the word probably, was far from definitive, it conflicted with Doug's statement that he was asleep in bed until just before he found Faylene in the tub. And the question of why she drowned at all was also at issue. Contrary to Chad White's instructions, Doug had filled and administered all of the prescriptions, including the Ambien, without consulting with White. This decision raised concerns considering the potential risks associated with combining the medications. White also stated, when I was giving Faylene CPR, Doug kept saying, I'm so sorry. I gave her a sleeping pill, and then she went and got in the bathtub, and I woke up. He was real frantic about it. And back to Faylene's detailed journal entries. In those entries, she wrote about her acceptance of dying early, believing it was God's will for her to fulfill a mission beyond this life. She included specific instructions for her family after her death, even expressing a desire for Doug to marry his former girlfriend, Hillary DeWitt, and for the two of them to raise her and Doug's children together. After remarrying Doug, Faylene actually began writing letters and making frequent calls to taking on the role of a spiritual mentor to the young woman whose heart had been broken when Faylene remarried Doug. I have held a secret hope and desire for several weeks that I would be able to see you both married, that I could be there. For some reason, this desire for you to be married immediately and to see you sitting together as husband and wife at my funeral has been so strong. I pray that your home will be protected from the adversary and filled with Holy Ghost. I know it will be. In a letter addressed to her children, she mentioned inviting Hillary to sit at the table as your mother while I am away, making it clear that she wanted Hillary to become a mother figure to their children. Faylene also wrote about her belief that Doug and Hillary would have a baby girl together. The daughter Faylene always thought that she would have someday. Faylene's journals also revealed her concerns about Doug's cheating again, even after they remarried. And while Faylene's journal entries were troubling enough on their own, what seemed to be the source of them was even more disturbing. Based on her writings, her premonitions of dying were driven by Doug's interpretations of what he told her were divine messages, even convincing her to accept another woman taking her place as both wife and mother. In her journals, she wrote about Doug's recurring dreams, where he envisioned her departure to the celestial kingdom. In an entry dated September 5, 2001, she expressed her acceptance of this fate, stating, I must have faith in Doug's vision. He dreams it every night now, that I will get to go to the celestial kingdom. The celestial kingdom is the highest degree of glory in Latter-day Saint theology. On the very day of Faylene's death, it's reported that a neighbor saw Doug and Hillary embracing at a local park, suggesting they were in a romantic relationship. During that encounter, at which point Faylene had not even been buried yet, Doug allegedly told Hillary that she would be his wife soon. Doug was said to have given her several $100s in cash, and showed her the letter from Faylene, encouraging them to marry. Phone records would later reveal that despite Doug remarrying Faylene, he had still been communicating with Hillary in the months preceding Faylene's death. And things would move fast once she was gone. Just 3 weeks after Faylene's death, Doug married Hillary. The timing of the marriage raised immediate red flags, and was the trigger for Faylene's family's initial concern. They knew that Doug began dating Hillary shortly after his divorce from Faylene. But they also knew that Doug did not limit himself to just one relationship, maintaining a paid subscription to the dating website LDS Singles for months after he started seeing Hillary. And of course, there was life insurance. Shortly before Faylene's death, the couple had attempted to increase her life insurance policy from $300,000 to $860,000. The increase was not approved and the policy remained at $300,000, which Doug collected as the sole beneficiary. Doug told police that increasing the amount was Faylene's idea and that he did not agree with it. Despite everything written in her journal, and having verbally told family that she would not be around for much longer as far back as a year prior, family insisted that Faylene would never have ended her own life, knowing it could jeopardize her entry into the celestial kingdom. But others argue that taking one's own life does not automatically keep them out of the kingdom. Based on all the findings, They were convinced that it was Doug who was responsible for taking away their loved one. While Fayleen's death remained classified as an accidental drowning, Doug was not spared from other consequences. With Fayleen's death, Doug's secret infidelities became exposed. As a result, he was excommunicated from the church in 2001 since adultery and sexual misconduct are considered grave violations of its doctrine. 9 months after Fayleen's death, her family convinced law enforcement to reopen the case, pointing to the information they believed warranted further investigation. The case was reopened and the police chief, who happened to be friends with Fayleen's father, reassigned the case to lead investigator Cy Ray. But by that point, mistakes had already been made. Given the assumption that Fayleen's death was an accident, officers had taken just 5 photographs of the bathroom and bedroom, failing to capture images that could have provided crucial context. Additionally, they neglected to collect key items for forensic analysis, including the bathtub, the sheets from the bed, and Fayleen's clothing. And of the forensic samples that were gathered, they were either mishandled or destroyed, leading to doubts about their accuracy. Authorities also lost Fayleen's medications, which might have held clues about what happened. To say the case faced challenges would be an understatement. Law enforcement struggled for years to build a strong enough case against Doug, hampered by the missteps and lost evidence early on. But their luck would eventually change. The case gained momentum 4 years after Fayleen's death in July 2005. Doug's friend Jim McAleer had approached Fayleen's family with incriminating information about Doug. He claimed that Doug had confessed to killing Fayleen. Investigators wanted to have a chat with him. When Detective Ray contacted Jim McAleer, Jim said that he didn't know anything and didn't want to get involved. Another year would pass without any progress. Then, on January 27, 2005, Fayleen's sister, Shirlene Patterson, contacted Ray again. She said that Jim had approached her family, claiming again that he had crucial information about Fayleen's death and would share the information if they gave him a $10,000 loan. Detective Ray worked with Shirlene to find a way to get Jim to tell them what he knew. He suggested staging a meeting in a wired car with undercover officers nearby. 2 weeks later, Shirlene and her husband met Jim in their wired car in the parking lot of a Walmart. Jim got into the car, and Shirlene handed him a $10,000 check. He then described visiting Doug the day after Fayleen's death. According to Jim, Doug said that Fayleen wanted to go to heaven and that he had helped her get to sleep. He said that Doug admitted crushing Ambien, putting it into capsules that Fayleen regularly took, then giving them to her. He then said that he filled the tub with water, undressed Fayleen, and placed her in the tub while she was still conscious but groggy. When she started stirring, he said Doug claimed he held her under until she drowned. Once Jim left the car, police arrested him for extortion and withholding evidence. Detective Ray offered him immunity in exchange for full cooperation. Facing the threat of jail time, Jim agreed to help. Detective Ray didn't waste any time. That same evening, Jim would conveniently bump into Doug at a building where Doug was holding a seminar. The two hadn't seen each other in over a year. Jim had been coached by Detective Ray to tell Doug that authorities were asking him about Fayleen's death earlier that day. Jim said, "I kind of panicked and told them I hadn't seen you for a couple of days after she died. They claimed they had information about what you told me about that morning." He went on to say that he had not told anyone about what you told me about what really happened to Fayleen. "What do you mean about what really happened?" "What did I say?" "About putting her to sleep." "What I told you, I told everyone," Doug said. Referring to the police, Jim replied, "They implied that somebody told them something." Doug told him, "I don't really remember at all that conversation." Jim reminded him, "You said it was like you were dreaming." "You'll have to explain it to me, Jim." Jim described you went in the bathroom, and you put her to sleep. "I did put her to sleep." "What do you mean?" "Put in the bathtub, put her to sleep." Then a week later, you said that's not what you meant. Doug replied, "Number one, Jim, these people say things and try to scare people. Just tell the truth." Jim reminded Doug of being alone in the house with him. Doug replied, "The only thing that concerns me with what you said is that I said that I put her to sleep in the tub. There's a lot of confusion, but the bottom line is I don't believe she killed herself. And I know I didn't kill her. And if all this comes out, all it's going to do is make her look bad when she was one of the most phenomenal people on the planet. If they want to come after me, they can try, but I know what happened. It was a really bad situation, but I loved her with all my heart." No one knows whether Doug realized that authorities had wired Jim, but it's certainly possible with Jim asking for confirmation of his confession right out of the gate. But in the end, the wiretapping didn't yield anything even remotely close to a confession. But confession or not, authorities felt that Jim's allegations were enough. They arrested Doug and charged him with first-degree murder in connection with Faline's death. The evidence against Doug appeared damning, but the full story was yet to unfold. As Doug fought to defend himself, his supporters felt he faced unfair obstacles at every turn, starting with the very reopening of the case. According to Doug's defenders, the family convincing authorities to reopen the case was not as genuine as it seemed. They noted that Faline's family remained amicable with Doug after her death, with 5 of them continuing to work as senior managers in his company for 6 months after her death. But then those family members attempted a hostile takeover of the business, pressuring Doug to leave. It failed and was followed by animosity. And within a month, the family pressed authorities to reopen the case, making accusations against Doug. They contended that Faline's father's close relationship with the Gilbert police chief, including the 2 of them attending the same church, influenced the chief's decision to take the case away from the investigator, who found no evidence of foul play, and assign it to his relative, Cy Ray, instead. His supporters also claimed that the pill bottles and forensic evidence that were conveniently lost would have proved that Faline's death was either accidental or of her own doing. And of course, they referenced Faline's journal entries, stating it was God's will for her to die. Entries that began well before she and Doug had reconciled and remarried. Hillary had even recalled how Faline told her during a phone call shortly before the fall that her death would be soon. And then there was Jim McCauley, appearing out of nowhere, instantly boosting suspicion of Doug's guilt. He seemed too good to be true to law enforcement, and perhaps he was. After the failed attempt to draw a confession from Doug, Jim would later eventually recant most of his statements about Doug's confession, admitting that he fabricated it and claiming that he was coerced by police. In a 2006 interview with the Phoenix New-Times, he elaborated on his recantation, stating, "Doug is an asshole, but I can't honestly say if he did or didn't kill Faline, who was a real sweet lady. I definitely got the feeling that the detective wanted Doug to be strung up on a post, and he didn't care how he got there. I wish I never had gotten involved in any of this." But despite McCauley having been the catalyst for Doug's arrest, his decision to recant did not result in any of the charges being dropped. Authorities would continue to build a case against him. The investigation languished for 3 years due to lack of evidence while Doug remained incarcerated. When the trial finally began, it unfolded as a dramatic legal battle, capturing intense media attention and public intrigue. The defense argued that Faline's death was either a tragic accident or attempted suicide, and that Doug had no reason to harm his wife. They referenced the high levels of Ambien in her system and Faline's letters and journal entries. What they did not present in court, however, were Faline's actual journal entries. Prosecutor Juan Martinez successfully blocked their inclusion, arguing that the writings were irrelevant or prejudicial. The defense was allowed to reference Faline's statements about being ready to die, but the jury could not see her words for themselves. It was another blow to the defense, as they intended to use the journal entries to document Faline's mindset. But the prosecution faced an uphill battle as well. Now facing trial without their star witness's recanted statement, they presented Doug Grant as a S***T fiend whose oversized libido triggered him to murder his wife so he could be with another woman. They argued that he fabricated dreams and visions to convince Faline that she had to die as part of God's plan, positioned Hillary as her replacement, and deliberately administered what would be a lethal combination of prescription drugs to hasten that happening. They also called into question Faline's fall in Utah, noting that it was highly suspicious due to her lack of severe injuries from such a significant height. As the prosecution presented their case, they faced heavy criticism by Doug's defense and his supporters for several controversial actions during the trial. In addition to the jury not being able to see Faline's journals, they were also not allowed to hear about Faline's family members working for Doug after her death, or about their hostile takeover attempt. The prosecutor also successfully prevented testimony, both about numerous accidental deaths caused by Ambien, and also about inconsistencies in Doug's stepdaughter's accounts of that morning. Doug's denial in the recorded conversation by Jim McCauley was also not disclosed to the jury or the media. Doug's supporters argued that the trial scene heavily tilted in the prosecution's favor. While the prosecution was allowed 14 weeks to present their case, the defense was granted only 2 weeks to make theirs. And as the jury deliberated for weeks without reaching a decision, it became apparent that they were struggling to agree on a verdict. In response, Prosecutor Martinez was allowed to add a lesser charge of manslaughter. This gave the jury an easier option to convict Doug, which, although legal, Doug's supporters felt was unfair. Overall, they argued that the prosecution pushed for a conviction based on emotions rather than solid evidence, and that all their controversial actions made it impossible for the jury to make an informed decision. The jury would take 12 more days after the new lesser charge was introduced. As anticipated, they could not agree on first or second-degree murder. They found Doug Grant guilty of manslaughter, indicating that they believed he recklessly caused Faline's death. Doug was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The case was closed, but questions lingered about whether justice had been truly served. Detective Cy Ray's role in the investigation against Doug Grant remains one of the most contentious and criticized aspects of the case. Ray faced allegations of bias, including manipulating evidence and exerting pressure on witnesses to align their testimonies with the prosecution's narrative. He was also accused of withholding key evidence, including Faline's highly revealing goodbye letters and interview tapes, depriving the defense, prosecution, and even grand juries of crucial context. Lost evidence, like the prescription bottles, only deepens suspicions of misconduct or negligence. More recently, Ray has transitioned to a career in forensic technology and consulting, founding a cellular geolocation mapping company in 2014, which was acquired in 2021. Ray has worked on high-profile cases and been featured as an expert on programs like 48 Hours and Dateline. He also co-hosts a crime podcast along with his wife, where he draws on his experience in law enforcement and technology. In early 2020, the prosecutor in Doug Grant's trial, Juan Martinez, was fired from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office after 32 years as a prosecutor following an internal investigation into his conduct. And later that year, he was disbarred following multiple allegations of professional misconduct, including sexual harassment of female colleagues and unethical behavior in high-profile cases. Martinez's disbarment has raised questions about the cases he prosecuted, including Doug Grant's. Critics argue that Martinez's aggressive tactics and ethical violations may have compromised the integrity of Doug's trial. However, no formal appeals or overturned convictions have been directly tied to his disbarment or termination. Doug's supporters called his conviction a miscarriage of justice. In 2009, in a quest to clear Doug's name, they launched a site called Doug Grant Truth, documenting the biases, corruption, and misconduct they claimed occurred during the investigation and trial. But for every person who supports Doug, there are just as many who are convinced of his guilt. They argue that it made no sense for Faline to remarry Doug if she truly believed she was about to die, especially if she genuinely wanted him to end up with Hillary instead. Instead, they believe that Doug remarried Faline fully aware of her death wish with the intention of cashing in on her life insurance policy. To them, his tears were nothing more than an act. Also in 2009, Doug's stepdaughter Jenna Stradling, 19 years old by that time, filed a multi-million-dollar wrongful death lawsuit against Doug, contending that Doug was responsible for her mother Faline's death. It sought punitive damages and aimed to prevent Doug from profiting from media deals related to the case. Key evidence that favored Doug, which was excluded from the criminal trial, was allowed in the civil trial, resulting in the judge ruling in Doug's favor. The judge concluded that there was no proof of actions beyond negligence and no clear evidence of intentional wrongdoing. The judge stated, "The evidence presented in the case at bar has not convinced this judge that it is highly likely that the defendant intentionally killed Faline Grant. Given all of the circumstances, including but not limited to those discussed above, the court declines to award punitive damages." Notable was the fact that Doug won the civil case despite not having a formal legal team. He represented himself with only the help of his wife and children, while Faline's family had the advantage of a professional legal team to represent them. Jim McLeay was never formally charged with extorting money from Faline's family. He has generally remained out of the spotlight after giving the 2006 interview to the Phoenix New-Times, where he criticized law enforcement's tactics. After serving his 5-year prison sentence, Doug returned to run his business. Doug and Hillary remained married throughout Doug's incarceration and after his release in 2015. Together, they continued raising Faline's 2 sons as a blended family. The couple also had a daughter, reflecting Faline's expressed wish for them to have a child together. They named her Nevaeh, which is heaven spelled backward. In 2022, Doug was inducted into the International Natural Bodybuilding Association's Hall of Fame, recognizing his dedication to promoting drug-free bodybuilding and his impact on the industry. He expanded his business to another city and conducts seminars and workshops on holistic health and nutrition. Despite moving forward, lingering questions about Doug's guilt or innocence continue to shadow him and his family, with opinions split about whether justice was served. Case 7. Mackenzie Sharila was born on August 2, 2004, to Natalie Sharila and John Stephen. She grew up in Strongsville, Ohio, where she and her sibling enjoyed a comfortable upbringing. During her teenage years, Mackenzie, like many young ladies her age, was an avid social media user, frequently posting videos with her friends on TikTok. Although Mackenzie appeared to be a sweet child in her younger years, those around her noted that a shift occurred once she became a teenager. Some described her as selfish, vindictive, and cruel. With the attractive youngster having typically gotten whatever it was that she wanted in life, her sense of entitlement was well known. It pushed many of her peers away from her. As Mackenzie grew older, her parents still knew her to be the well-behaved daughter they had always raised, unaware of her developing issues. She began using drugs and engaging in disrespectful behavior, including vandalizing a church while she was under the influence. And her actions only intensified once she began high school at Strongsville High. It was there that she would meet Dominic Russo. Throughout his childhood, Dominic was well known for his great sense of humor and ability to lift the spirits of those around him. His siblings said that he was the one who always made them smile, always wearing the biggest grin himself. With his strong passion to grow and make the most of each day, Dominic was already an accomplished businessman, athlete, song producer, and entrepreneur by the time he was just 20 years old. But with his desire to make a broader impact on his community and to give back to people beyond his hometown, he planned to join the military. Dominic and Mackenzie were attracted to each other and began dating in 2021. They originally kept their relationship quiet, but shortly after they started dating, they made their relationship public via social media. Mackenzie would frequently post photos of them looking happy and in love. They appeared to be soulmates, spending as much time together as possible. Their families met and grew close as well, and it appeared that nothing could come between them. They eagerly anticipated graduating high school, so they could start their lives together. But the bliss didn't last long. Dominic began to notice a side of Mackenzie that he was not fond of. She started to expect Dominic to agree with everything that she said, and he started to get frustrated with how controlling she was. Amidst it all, though, they continued to project the image of a perfect couple on social media. At some point, Dominic decided to break off the relationship and approach Mackenzie with the news. Mackenzie disagreed and was unwilling to give up on them. But Dominic, desperate to be freed, insisted. Mackenzie was upset, but also determined to rekindle their relationship. But her way of going about it was problematic. She began showing up at Dominic's house, threatening to harm him and damage his property if he didn't let her in. On one of the occasions, he recorded her outside of his home making the threats. Dominic tried his best to defuse the situations, trying to reason with Mackenzie and calm her down at every turn. As he continued to reject her, Mackenzie's frustration and desperation grew stronger. She alternated between begging him to take her back and threatening him if he didn't. "What do you mean?" But the more she shipped her true side, the more convinced Dominic became that ending their relationship was the right decision. Despite the breakup and bitter disputes, like they had done in the past, the couple would eventually reconcile. They got back together, and Mackenzie seemed like a changed person, softening her aggression and seemingly genuinely sweet. She made plans for her and Dominic to attend a party their friend of theirs was having. Dominic was looking forward to the evening. Mackenzie got planned every detail. She and Dominic attended the party where their friends were pleased to see the perfect couple happily back together again. The pair danced, drank, and enjoyed themselves. To Dominic, it felt like an ideal night, and Mackenzie felt that way as well, but for an entirely different reason. At the party, they connected with one of Dominic's best friends, Davian Flanagan. Mackenzie also knew Davian. He was 19, and despite a challenging childhood in foster care before being adopted in 2010, he was extremely kind-hearted and positive. He had recently graduated from Strongsville High School, where he was on the football team. He planned to attend barber school, then open a barber shop in their small town. Davian joined Mackenzie and Dominic partying. Then the three of them stayed at their friend's house until the early hours of the next day. At 5 a.m., Mackenzie woke up Dominic to head home. As she was waking Dominic, Davian also woke up and asked for a ride home. So, on that morning, One day before Mackenzie's 18th birthday, Mackenzie, 20-year-old Dominic, and 19-year-old Davian left the party around 5 a.m. in Mackenzie's 2018 Toyota Camry. Mackenzie was behind the wheel, with Dominic in the passenger seat and Davian in the back. Initially, Mackenzie, the only one wearing a seatbelt, drove slowly, maintaining perfect control. But as she turned onto Progress Drive from Pearl Road, she pressed the accelerator and didn't let go. The street was just 3/4 of a mile long, or 1.2 kilometers, but within that distance, she reached a speed of 100 miles per hour. The road was relatively straight, perfectly suited for gaining unbridled speed. She sped through the industrial complex, headed directly toward the end of the road, where just beyond it stood a brick building. At the very last moment, she veered directly toward it, then crashed into it head-on at 100 miles per hour. But it was a very early Sunday morning in an area exclusively occupied by industrial business buildings, so there was not a soul around. It was a full 45 minutes before a passerby spotted the wreckage and called police. Within minutes, Strongsville police arrived at the crash site. Officers arrived at the scene of the devastating crash. The car barely resembled a car at all anymore. As the first officer hurriedly approaches, he reports that the car is split in half. This car is split in two. This severity of the crash is obvious, and he calls for additional units, noting that there is at least one person inside the vehicle. Radio, there's an occupant inside. Send us a squad now. This is not a fresh accident either. She's been here for a while. The officer notices another occupant. Radio, we've got at least 2 occupants in here. No one's moving. Oh my God. The officer finds the 3rd occupant. Oh my God. ×3 guys. Radio, 3 occupants. No one's conscious. No one's breathing. But then they quickly notice that the driver of the vehicle is breathing. They cannot extract Mackenzie. Her head is wedged in, and she's severely pinned in the vehicle. Her fuzzy Prada slippers still pressed against the accelerator. They won't be able to extract her until fire and rescue arrives. In the meantime, despite their experience, the officers are clearly impacted by the scale of the accident and the loss of life. Oh my God! Oh my God! Jesus Christ! That's the worst I've ever seen. Rest in peace, buddy. Mackenzie has survived. Dominic and Davian did not. There were car parts everywhere. The car had struck the building with such force that it looked like it had exploded. Fire and rescue arrive. Mackenzie is extracted and life-flighted to the hospital, where she will undergo multiple surgeries to save her life. She tested positive for THC, consistent with her having smoked marijuana. And she was also in possession of a bag of magic mushrooms and a digital scale. Initially, the police believed that Mackenzie had crashed because she was high. But as the investigation began to unfold, authorities began to suspect that what Mackenzie had done was far more deliberate. When Mackenzie woke up in the hospital and realized she had survived, she tearfully told her doctors that it was her fault for killing her boyfriend. While the doctors thought these were just the rantings of a remorseful driver, the police took her statement seriously. After undergoing multiple surgeries, Mackenzie was released from the hospital and returned home with her parents. As the Shirillas prepared to welcome their daughter home, the Russos and Flanagans were planning funerals for their sons. Meanwhile, the prosecutor's office was conducting a thorough investigation, and it was not looking good for Mackenzie. For starters, police interviewed several of Mackenzie and Dominic's friends, from which a consistent theme emerged. They learned that she had frequently threatened him during their on-again off-again relationship. Threats like keying his car and forcing her way into his home, like mentioned previously, but also threatening to kill him by crashing her car with him inside of it. The most recent such threat occurring just 2 weeks before the crash when she told him, "Dominic, I will crash this car right now." Around that same time period, Dominic had even called his mother asking her to come pick him up because he was riding with Mackenzie and she was driving recklessly. Also, authorities and the public felt like Mackenzie was not acting like a grieving girlfriend responsible for 2 people's deaths. The photograph that she posted on Dominic's obituary seemed, as one news publication called it, twisted. Many also found it inappropriate and tasteless for her to attend a Halloween party so soon after the deaths that she was responsible for, especially dressed as both marijuana and a corpse, and then post the fully decked-out costume photos on her social media account. And those weren't her only posts. Within weeks of the crash, she had returned to posting TikToks. "I'm not even cool. I'm just one of those girls that can do a lot of drugs and not die." In one of her posts, she shockingly claimed that she was the one you die for. and she drew the same sentiment for a concert she attended. Shortly after she was released from the hospital, she was seen attending a concert, still in a wheelchair from her injuries. There were also posts that Mackenzie and her mother made on social media, replying to and soliciting a modeling job. Community members felt it was so inappropriate after the deaths that they emailed the exchanges they had made with the Los Angeles modeling agency to the police department. And police also gathered and analyzed the physical evidence. A thorough analysis was done on the vehicle, and it was found to not have any defects or malfunctions that would have contributed to the crash. Additionally, the Toyota's event data recorder, also known as its black box, revealed that the moment Mackenzie turned onto Progress Road, she began pressing the accelerator pedal to the floor the entire stretch of the road, her foot still in that position when they found her. She never attempted to press the brake pedal. She barreled down the short road until it teed at the end, slightly veering into the grass as she aimed for the building. The black box along with surveillance video showed that the steering wheel jerked 142 degrees to the right, and then left just before the car left the road and crashed into the building. And speaking of that surveillance video, that is where investigators truly began to question the teenager's actions. The bad behavior before the crash and the questionable actions afterward were not necessarily definitive. But the surveillance footage together with the black box data began to leave little doubt. Multiple businesses in the area captured the teenager's ill-fated path that early morning. But two of those videos in particular gave authorities a clear picture of the car, both en route and right up through the point of impact. The first one showed Mackenzie when she was calmly and responsibly rounding the final corner, including traveling at a reasonable speed, reducing her speed to make the turn, and even signaling to turn. Her actions in that video, authorities determined, were not consistent with someone erratically driving under the influence. The second video shows how once she is on the final road, she accelerates at full speed before finally veering at the last moment into the brick building. Her controlled actions just prior to turning onto the street indicated that Mackenzie was in complete control of the vehicle. So authorities concluded that her actions once she turned the corner were entirely deliberate. Taking a look at her route via Google Maps puts into perspective exactly how devastating her 100-mile-per-hour plunge into the building actually was. As she traveled down Progress Avenue, headed straight toward the building that lied at the end, veering slightly onto the grass as she was about to traverse the rocks and sign, heading straight for the corner of the building. The devastation was not surprising, and such a meticulous, destructive path was no accident either. After analyzing Mackenzie's phone and GPS data, authorities found that she had spent a significant amount of time on that completely out-of-the-way Progress Road just a few days before the crash. They surmised that she had spent the time scouting the area as she plotted the crash, given no other explanation for her to be in that industrial area. But Mackenzie wasn't taking any responsibility. In fact, she felt like what she had done didn't at all warrant the potential punishment she may be facing. In the immediate aftermath of the accident, she asked police if they could just take my license away for 10 years or something like that. But her acts would have far greater consequences despite her perspective. Between her scouting of the area prior to the crash, the threats she had made during her and Dominic's tumultuous relationship, the speed and path she took on the deadly ride, along with her foot still being on the gas pedal, authorities were confident that Mackenzie intentionally and callously took the lives of Dominic and Davion. On November 4th, 2022, authorities arrested Mackenzie Shirilla. She is charged with over 12 counts, including 4 counts of murder, 4 counts of felonious assault, 2 counts of aggravated vehicular homicide, 1 count of drug possession, and 1 count of possessing criminal tools. Given that she was 17 at the time of the incident, she was taken to a juvenile detention facility. During pre-trial hearings, the prosecution offered Mackenzie a plea deal. She turned it down, and her attorney indicated they were prepared to take it to trial. For that trial, Mackenzie chose to waive her right to a jury trial, opting instead for a bench trial, taking her chances on what a judge may decide versus 12 jurors. Given the circumstances surrounding Mackenzie's crime, the prosecution planned to try her as an adult. For the trial, prosecutors outlined Mackenzie's aggressive behavior and threats toward Dominic to show how she reacted when she didn't get her way or when Dominic wouldn't do what she wanted. They outlined the time when she repeatedly warned Dominic to let her into his home or face the consequences. She threatened to break the handle off the door if he didn't let her in, and she began hitting the door and counting down the seconds before there was about to be said problem. Their evidence also showed that Mackenzie was fully aware that she could cause serious harm to her victims by way of her vehicle, given the repeated threats she made about crashing her car with Dominic in it. They argued that in the months following the crash, instead of being remorseful or mourning the deaths of Dominic and Davion, she was living a carefree and frivolous life, presenting the TikToks she made, her concert attendance, and her pursuit of modeling jobs. They presented the physical evidence and crash expert testimony that revealed how the crash was neither an accident nor the result of any malfunction of the vehicle. Instead, Mackenzie had deliberately and meticulously planned and carried out the death of Dominic, and his best friend, who simply requested a ride home, became meaningless collateral damage to her. In contrast, Mackenzie's defense team argued that the crash was a tragic accident that Mackenzie had no memory of. They argued that it was impossible to know who actually pulled the wheel to turn it at 142 degrees, just 1 second before impact causing the crash. He asked the crash analyst who testified whether Mackenzie could have been swerving to dodge an unexpected obstacle, whether a passenger could have grabbed the wheel to control the steering, or perhaps she was desperately trying to regain control of the vehicle. He did acknowledge that Mackenzie was, indeed, driving recklessly, but the evidence to the contrary, particularly the surveillance video evidence, was overwhelming. The judge noted, prosecutors noted that the video was also why they chose to try Sharila as an adult, stating, the judge found Mackenzie Sharila guilty on all 12 charges. At the sentencing hearing, the prosecution reminded the court about Mackenzie's lack of remorse, represented by her actions in the weeks and months after the crash. The judge also allowed statements from the families of those involved. Davion's mother was the first to address the court. Your Honor, my name is Jamie Flanagan. I am the mother of the victim Davion Flanagan. I want to share a small part of what we lost on July 31st, 2022. My son Davion is, and always will be, so much more than cargo. He was precious. He was an amazing soul with a heart of gold. He gave to the world what he wanted most in his own life, love. The kind of love that would rescue a friend in the middle of the night, no questions asked. The kind that would protect others and honor them. He made friends easily with his infectious smile. He was a gifted athlete. He had plans to go to barber school and open his own shop. My son did not have a clique of friends, but instead was a friend to all. He would go out of his way to show love and kindness to others, including those that were often cast aside by society. The less fortunate, the developmentally challenged, the hurting, and the unvalued. Davion made sure that everyone that crossed his path knew that he truly saw them, that he valued them, and that they were worth his time. Davion and my kids have had more than their fair share of heartbreak, of hardship, and of loss. Davion was adopted with his sisters from foster care. They are biological siblings. We are honored to be chosen, or to have been chosen, to be their parents, their forever family. I am devastated by the loss of Davion. The world lost a truly special man. The court also heard from Dominic's mother. I'm Christine Russo. I'm Dominic's mother. No one wanted this to be a murder, or to punish Mackenzie Sharila for this accident. But this was not a car accident. The evidence and science proved that Mackenzie Sharila murdered my son, Dominic, as well as Davion. There's no fix put in this case, as the Sharilas would like to proclaim. I want to thank Strongsville Police Department and the state of Ohio for seeking the truth behind this crash. Thanks to them, we all know what happened in that car that day. What we don't know is why. I wish I could change this every day. I lost 3 children in that crash. Not a minute goes by each day that I don't think about my son, as well as Davion. My heart is forever broken. The cries heard from the Sharila family and friends after the verdict are nothing more than a lack of remorse. Mackenzie Sharila had a choice. Dom and Davion did not. We are all left here to mourn. But what Dave, Dom, and Nick and Davion lost can never be remedied in any way or by any particular sentence. On July 31st, 2022, I called Mackenzie's mother, hysterical with the loss of my son and Davion. I knew Mackenzie was in the hospital, and the first statement said to me was, "Oh, please don't listen to what everyone's saying on Facebook. Yeah, my son is dead, his friend is dead, and I'm checking on yours. Yet social media is what's important. Social media has made a game out of the life of Mackenzie, and is making a game out of this heart-wrenching tragedy. No one can imagine the pain of losing a child unless they have lost one themselves. The pain is forevermore. Time does not heal this wound. Mackenzie, going to prison because you did this. Be thankful that you're still alive and have a future, whatever that may be. Dom and Davion were robbed of their futures, their hopes, and their dreams. Mackenzie showed no mercy on Dominic, nor did she on Davion. Only God at this time can have mercy on her soul. Thank you. Mackenzie's mother also addressed the court. My name is Natalie Sharilla. I just want to say, am I allowed to address them at all? Sure. I just want to say to the families that I'm broken, sad, and lost, and my heart hurts for everyone, okay? Davion was her new friend, and Dom was the love of her life, and who was part of our family, okay? I'm just so sorry that this happened, and we're heartbroken, okay? And then, Your Honor, this was a terrible, tragic, nightmare accident to have happened that she has no memory of, and she will never emotionally or physically recover from it. She almost died, too, and we're asking that you please not run the sentence consecutive. He was family, and we all loved each other. That morning of the accident, she called. I got a phone call that there was a car accident, okay? So we went to the hospital, and I didn't even know who was in the car. The names had not been confirmed yet, and I was going to cry because I missed him so much. We loved him so much. So I called Dom like over and over again, praying that he was going to answer the phone, and he didn't answer the phone. So then I tried to call his mom, and she didn't answer the phone either, and I still didn't know who was in the car. I didn't even know if she was alive. I didn't know what was happening. So then we were in the waiting room, and then his mom ended up, she did call me, so I answered the phone, and I was like, oh my God, like, I don't even know who was in the car. Like, what's happening? What's that, Dom? And she said, what do you mean? My son is dead. And I was like, I'm so sorry. And then she said something like, and now I have to wait until your kid's out of the hospital. And then I didn't hear the rest. I was like, we loved him so much, and I hung up the phone. I did not talk about social media. I didn't even know what was going on yet, okay? So then that was it. In the hospital, that Vitality post, I commented on that because somebody had called her a murderer, okay? And she's not a murderer. So she didn't even have her phone at that point because the police had still had it, okay? So I jumped on, and I was like, you know, she's not a murderer. She's more sad than hurt than most of these people commenting. She's been trying to get in touch with you. I mean, at that point, it was just an accident. So I commented on her behalf, not because of the modeling opportunity. I don't even, who cares about that? I don't want them to refer to her as a murderer, okay? And I don't even know how that comment had got on the phone, because the police still had her device, and she could not access her phone or social media. That's why I did it. And I had called them asking if they could shut down social media, because people were calling her a murderer and making death threats and organizing groups to, you know, take her out when she got out of the hospital and stuff. So I didn't even want her phone. I don't care about her phone. I don't care about social media. I just wanted them to stop calling her a murderer, so that when she did come to, and she did come out of surgery, multiple surgeries, that she wouldn't see all these people calling her a murderer, because she would never, ever, ever murder the love of her life, okay? The Halloween, for 3 months after the accident, she would only wear his clothes. She would only eat the snacks he ate. She would only listen to the music he wrote, okay? So she was crying for 3 months. So her friends asked if she wanted to go out trick-or-treating or Halloween, and it was at OU. And she didn't even want to go. She said, I don't know. Should I go? She couldn't even walk yet, barely. So I told her, I said, baby, please go. It's Halloween. You've been laying for 3 months crying, only listening to his music. Please go. Have just a moment of fun, a moment of fun. So we told her to go. My husband drove her. I brought her back home. She just needed a second of fun from losing her whole world. Her whole world. So that was us. We told her to go. And that concert she went to with Dom's cousin, Abby, they picked her up. They brought her there. Mackenzie and Dom and Abby all decided to go to this concert together while they were in the hospital. She's like devastated and tragic. He was the air that she breathes, okay? And they went with his cousin. We spent all kinds of time with them after the accident. What was the other thing? I'm hearing an awful lot about your daughter. I'm not hearing very much about her today. Dominic, okay. I'm asking you for leniency because this was a tragic accident that she does not remember. And Davion, he's a new friend, and I'm so sorry. Does that mean his wife is worthless? No. No. God, no, not at all. They all loved each other. They all spent every day together. I understand what it looks like. I'm saying that it was a tragic accident. She would never. I understand. But anyway, that's it. I just wanted to address those. We told her to go to those things, and then she did go with Dom's family. So look at that. Don't look at it with look on that with different eyes if you can please. Those things are not relevant. Not at all. But she's a good. If you would have a moment, all you would need is 5 minutes of a conversation to have with her. to learn who she is. You would just need 5 minutes to learn who she is and what she's capable of not doing and doing, and you would see for yourself. That's all. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm sorry. I love you. And lastly, Mackenzie chose to speak as well. Mackenzie, you don't have to speak if you don't want to. It's up to you. I would love to. Okay, we're gonna stay in the room. You can stay if it's more comfortable. Okay, to the families of Dom and Nadia, I'm so deeply sorry. I hope one day you can see I would never let this happen or do it on purpose. I wish I could remember what happened. I'm just so sorry. I'm heartbroken. I love Dom and Nadia. We were all friends and Dom was my soulmate. I wish I could take all your pain away, and I'm so sorry. And to my family, thank you for the support and all the love you guys give. Thank you for fighting with me. I love you all so much. All right, I'm done. Thank you, guys. Okay. With her guilty verdicts, Mackenzie was facing an automatic sentence of life imprisonment with no opportunity for parole for 15 years for each of her 2 murder convictions. The most challenging aspect of the sentencing for the judge was deciding whether the sentences should be served consecutively or concurrently. She noted that while the families desired the harshest sentence possible, she had to balance the need for justice with the circumstances of the case. She sentenced Mackenzie Sharila to 2 concurrent terms of 15 years to life for the murders of Dominic Russo and Davian Flanagan. Serving them concurrently would make her eligible for parole in 15 years. Some advocates for Sharila debate her guilt online, with her proponents making such arguments as Mackenzie having been coerced into a bench trial and that her post-crash TikToking and party-going, while perhaps in poor taste, were standard fare for teenagers and were not indicative of guilt. Some also believe that Sharila's acceleration could have either been her accidentally pressing the accelerator instead of the brake, or perhaps there was a malfunction where her pressing the brake did not register. Overall, her advocates feel that there was no evidence proving Mackenzie intentionally drove the car into a wall at 100 miles per hour, and that all the evidence against her was simply to attack her character. But most people are in the same Sharila as guilty camp as the prosecutor, who, after the trial, commented, "The intent was obvious upon seeing that video that there was only one goal, and the computer demonstrated that there was no attempt to slow down or stop, that it was full speed into a building, and tragically it cost 2 people their lives." While they were relieved that Mackenzie was found guilty, most of Dominic and Davian's family members expressed disappointment with the verdict, hoping instead for consecutive sentences. They felt that Mackenzie had taken the lives of 2 innocent young men and deserved to serve the rest of hers in prison. However, Dominic's father, Frank Russo, was more forgiving. He reflected that while his family was devastated, he hoped Sharila could eventually be freed. He stated, "It's horrible for everybody. Yeah, I lost my son. It's harder on our family. But I don't want the rest of her life ruined, too. It isn't going to make me feel any better." Mackenzie is currently serving her sentence in the Ohio Reformatory for Women. With her following of people who believe in her innocence, she receives letters from them in prison. She will be eligible for parole on October 21st, 2037.